Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the MHA What If with another fanfiction. This is the first part of What If Deku Returned to Japan with All for One? All credits for this video go to their respective authors, so please support the real author. Check out the link in the description for more details. Please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. They don't know you, they don't know you, they don't know you. Izuku Midoriya repeated those words in his head like a mantra until he found his seat in the written portion of the exam. Outwardly he knew he looked calm, his shoulders loose and face relaxed into a friendly smile, a facade he had learned at a young age. His naturally expressive face had given him away one too many times on the run, and you learned quickly when your life was at stake. Smiling and being friendly was a good way to deflect suspicion and gain trust. People were much less likely to give information about you to strangers if they liked you, and information was one thing you could never let the enemy have the upper hand on. No one was looking at him, not that he was expecting them to, he was just another face in the hundreds of other test takers. Another pencil scratching in answers as quickly as possible so as to not run out of the limited time for the intense exam. Question 43 #explain the law of conversion of mass through chemical reactions. Knowledge had never been a problem for him. Years on the run made information his only reliable friend and companion, his greedy mind devouring anything that would provide a distraction to the constant loneliness. He had finished middle school work when he was 10 and had quickly moved on from there. Questions like these weren't a challenge, though he kind of wished they were. It had been a while since he'd been challenged academically. He finished answering the questions with half an hour to spare, clearly faring better than most of the surrounding candidates. It still blew his mind how many were trying out, attempting to get into the most prestigious school in the country. Thousands tried to get in, only 160 made it. The large auditorium where the physical portion of the exam was explained by present Mike of all people. Was it to get them more hyped up? Considering the resounding silence when the blonde hero had asked for a wedge, it wasn't working well. After being interrupted by a boy with the straightest posture Izuku had ever seen, the examines were led to a large beta testing ground and given 5 minutes preparation. Izuku closed his eyes and breathed deeply. You can do this, you've fought your whole life, you can fight a few robots. Just remember, if you take it, make sure to give it back quickly. If nobody's suspicious, your secret is safe. He opened his eyes and felt a sense of cold calm washed over him. You can't stop me. Present Mike screamed, "Go!" And Izuku took off immediately, leaving the other stunned examinees in the dust. All Might, otherwise known as Toshinori Yagi, watched as the young children began the exam, a feeling of nostalgia overcoming him. It had been many years since he'd fought through the same trials, but he still remembered the adrenaline, the feeling of wanting to prove himself. Prove that his Emsar hadn't been wrong in her choice of successor. Prove that her death hadn't been in vain. That blonde kid is going nuts, drawled Snipe. Look at him go, he's practically on a rampage. Hizashi leaned forward. He's being reckless though, look at that falling debris. If it weren't for the black-haired kid we'd have at least 3 serious injuries. Indeed, another of the examinees was shielding his fellow testers with the help of what appeared to be a hardening quirk. He's certainly racking up those rescue points. He commented. There was a potential holder. He thought. One must be selfless. Only Nizu and Recovery Girl knew the real reason he was here, so it wasn't exactly like he could ask the other teachers on their opinions of a possible successor. Not that he didn't trust the other heroes, it was just that the less people knew, the less likely it was to get out. One for all was a guarded secret that was only shared when strictly necessary. With that amount he'll most likely get in. Nemuri grinned. Same with the blonde. He's going to need some behavioral control though, I can already tell. I don't want him, Vlad said immediately. Aizawa glared at him from across the room. And you think I do? I've already got to deal with Endeavor's brat, I don't need another cocky powerhouse. No matter, Nizu said, the chatter dying in an instant. It's time for the 0-pointers. The small rodent? Bear? Looked far too gleeful as he pressed the large red button, activating the gigantic robots, causing immediate chaos. Even through the screens, Toshinori could see the fear and panic overtaking many of the teens, screams ringing through several arenas. Never gets old. Nemuri said, liking her lips. Think someone will try to go after the zero-pointer? Snipe shook his head. You still have that bet with Hizashi? No one's destroyed the thing since All Might. Even if there were kids powerful enough to break it, they're probably booking it. It's not worth any points. She crossed her arms. It's got to happen one of these years. Even if it's by accident, I still win. Well, it looks like you owe me another meal out, Hizashi said with a grin, adjusting his glasses. No one's going after them. Make sure to watch Arena H. Aizawa said suddenly. There's a girl trapped under some rubble. We're going to have to stop the zero-pointer before it steps on her. No sooner than the words left his mouth did a green-haired boy start running towards her. Oh, what's this? Nizu leaned forward, eager as the rest of them to see how it panned out. The boy used what looked like some form of telekinesis to float the rubble off of her, but it was too late. Her legs appeared to be injured and he wouldn't be able to help her get her out of the zero-pointer's range before it hit both of them. He then sent all the surrounding rubble flying at the zero-pointer, seemingly purposely aiming for the joints. I guess I don't owe you a meal. Nemuri gloated as the enormous robot crashed to the ground. Ochako Uraraka breathed heavily as she pressed the pads of her fingers together, causing the robots above her to come crashing to the ground. She thought triumphantly, pointedly ignoring the nausea rolling through her gut. She knew would soon reach her limit, but dmed if she was going to make it to 50 points. I will get into UA. She mentally chanted. No one can stop me. A loud rumble tore through the testing ground, and Ochako whipped around to see. How is that a zero-pointer? Ochako wasted no time, sprinting as fast as she could away from her impending doom when rubble fell from the nearby building and trapped her legs. Trapped her in the way of the looming robot so huge it blocked out the sun. She attempted to use her quirk on the rubble, but it wasn't within her limit having already used it so much today. I'm gonna die, I'm gonna die, I'm gonna die. Then she saw him. Tenya Ida stared in horror as the zero-pointer rose, causing mass destruction to the buildings around it. Most of the examines had already fled the scene, not wanting to be anywhere near the towering figure and risk the rest of their precious time on fighting something that wasn't even worth any points. He was about to do the same when he noticed someone running towards instead of away from the robot. A second later, he realized why. A girl was trapped underneath the rubble, desperately trying to claw her way out to no avail. As the short green-haired boy reached her, he saw them quickly exchange words, the distance too great for Tenya to hear them. After a quick nod, the boy extended his right hand forcefully towards the rubble trapping the girl. The zero-pointer was nearly on them. The rubble began to float, was sent flying towards the zero-pointer, knocking it backwards as the boy slung the girl's arm over his shoulder and the two began limping away from the falling robot. Time's up, listeners. Let's hope you got enough points. Present Mick's loud voice broke through the testing ground. All those who are injured, please go see a medic. Plus Ultra. As the small boy helped her across the field to the doctor, for a fraction of an instant, Tenya's eyes met his. Why didn't you help? Those cold green eyes seemed to ask. Why did you stand by? The boy's eyes flickered away and the moment was gone. Tenya almost hoped the boy wouldn't get in, despite his heroic actions, so he wouldn't have to see those cold, cold eyes again. Izuka hadn't originally planned on saving the girl, but something about the desperate way she attempted to get away had hit a little too close. He knew what it was like to be trapped with no way out. Thankfully, airlift, minor pull and force push had been enough to lift the rubble, and with a little help from auto-aim he'd managed to stop the robot and he'd been able to get her out before both of them got crushed. He'd probably gotten enough points earlier to make up for the lost time, so he wasn't too worried about getting in. He hoped she was doing okay. Her bubbly pink light had been strained the last time he seen her, though in all fairness, she had been so nauseated at the time she'd throw up on his shoes. He tried not to remember how easily he could have grabbed her light, how wonderful the bubbliness would have felt if he were to hold it. Izuku slung the backpack filled with all his belongings over his shoulder. I wonder if there's any youth shelters that won't ask questions. Izuku swallowed heavily as he looked at the results of the exam. Written test, 94%. Physical exam, 24 villain points and 30 rescue points. He had done it, he'd been accepted to UA. I did it, Mom, he thought, silent tears streaming down his face. I'm going to be a hero. Shodaizawa was tired. It wasn't a new development, and probably wouldn't change any time in the foreseeable future, but at this very moment, his tiredness could be blamed on one individual in particular. All Might. When Nizu first told them that the #1 hero was going to be joining the teaching staff at UA, Shota nearly spat out his coffee, and would have if not for the fact that it would have wasted perfectly good coffee. The reveal of his smaller form also came as a surprise, but in truth it did make sense. No one ever saw All Might getting groceries, and it was pretty hard to miss an extremely buff 7-foot-tall man. There were just some people you couldn't miss. So now not only were they going to be dealing with a new teacher with zero experience handling kids, but the added press of All Might being at the school gave Shota a headache just thinking about it. The school year hasn't even started, why do you already look like you want to commit homicide? He looked up to see Namuri leaning against his desk, a turtleneck and jeans replacing her iconic hero costume. There was no need for her to wear it in the sanctity of the teacher's lounge, not to mention that there weren't even any kids in the building at the moment. Just thinking about what a pain this year is going to be. He groaned. We've got the blonde idiot joining us, and I can already tell this year's class is going to be a nightmare. She raised an eyebrow. This soon? I thought we got a decent batch. Quite a few of the kids were impressive during the entrance exam. Shota took a sip of his coffee. The entrance exam is flawed and you know it. Namuri didn't argue. We work with what we've got. She said with a sigh. You're not the only one who said though, I seriously can't believe that Nizu let Minoru Mineta join UA, much less the hero course. It wasn't completely up to him. Shota reminded her. The board pushed hard for him to get in, his family donated a lot of money. Namuri slammed her hand against his desk. That doesn't excuse the fact that he has had several SXL assault and harassment claims made against him. Even if his school tried to cover them up, they're still there. Shota gave her a look. You know what Nizu's doing, don't you? The brat's in my class, so the second he does something inappropriate I'll boot him. If he does it on UA grounds in front of a teacher, then the board won't be able to refuse us expelling him. Not unless they want a media shitstorm. This seemed to temper the full-on rant that had been brewing within her. I still wish we didn't have to play this stupid game, she said, wrinkling her nose. And I wish All Might wasn't going to be teaching here, but we can't always have what we want, now can we? I know that. She playfully swatted him. What do you have against All Might anyway? You seem particularly aggravated over his appointment. How can you hate the #1 hero? Shota rolled his eyes. I don't hate him, I just think it's illogical to have him teach with us. He's got no experience and will only become more of a target. Even if we have All Might joining us, what's the worst that can happen? We've always been a target for villains, we've dealt with it before and we will again. Namuri said resolutely. Nothing bad is going to happen. Famous last words. Hitoshi Shinso tried to hold in the tears that threatened to spill down his face, the symbol of UA disfigured as he crumpled the letter. What were you expecting? A voice that sounded suspiciously like his mother hissed. Why would they accept someone like you into the hero course? All you'll ever be is a villain. He clenched his fists. Stupid exam. Stupid quirk bias. He looked at the darkening sky. I'm gonna need some shelter before it starts raining. 15 minutes and one soaking shirt later, Hitoshi managed to get to his usual spot. While the abandoned warehouse wasn't the most ideal place for a teenager to be living, he still preferred it over going back there. As musty and dirty as this place was, at least it didn't smell of booze and bad life choices. It was as close to a home as he got, or at least, it usually was when there wasn't someone else on his couch. It had taken him 3 hours to haul that thing from the lawn front he'd found it from, and there was someone just casually lying there. Who are you? He demanded, striding toward. The body jolted out of what he assumed was sleep and the figure fell off the couch. Hitoshi thought vindicatively. As they quickly scrambled to their feet, Hitoshi got a better look at who was invading his space. Messy dark green hair and a smattering of freckles filled his vision as the boy who looked to be around his age met his eyes. F dash dot. The boy said. It was a short and somewhat relatable response, and enough to let Hitoshi take control. Intelligent green eyes went blank as the boy became a virtual doll. Who are you? He asked. Izuku Midoriya. Came the robotic answer. Why are you here? I needed a place to stay. I don't want to have to stay at the youth shelters all the time, and I figured I could just crash here. Could you not tell someone was already living here? I just figured I would scare them off and take it as my own. Hitoshi blinked in disbelief. This small child honestly thought he would have been able to scare of the person living here. It could have been a full-grown man or villain for all the other boy knew. What the F dash? Why do you need a place to stay? Is he like me? Though it shouldn't have been possible, Hitoshi somehow felt a great strain on his connection to the boy, as if something was trying to make his mental bond break. I don't have anywhere else to go. He should just make the other boy leave and forget this ever happened. That would be the smart thing to do, the safe thing to do. There was literally no reason for him let the other boy stay. If I let you go and let you remember what happened, would you? Hitoshi can't believe he's doing this. Like to stay here with me? Oh my god, he shouldn't have done that. He should not have done that. Why would someone, much less a complete stranger, want to live with someone who had just brainwashed them? He should just order the boy to forget this. Yes, that's what he should do. Hitoshi opened his mouth to fix this effing mess that he'd gotten himself into because he was so goddamn lonely. Sure. What? Hitoshi looked into the brainwashed boy's eyes. Repeat what you just said. His voice didn't crack, damn it. Sure. The boy said obediently. You don't care that I've used my quirk on you? Or what my quirk is? No. The strain on his mind came back, doubling in strength. Hitoshi winced as he struggled to maintain his connection to the other teen. Are you going to hurt me in any way if I let you go? No. That was enough for Hitoshi, who released his hold on the shorter boy's mind with a hiss. He didn't know what that was, but whatever it was, it had hurt. It had felt as though a sledgehammer had been pounding against his head with a vengeance. The blank look faded from, what was it? Midoriya's eyes as the teen straightened. That was a weird feeling. Hitoshi tensed as the boy looked directly at him. What's your name, new roommate? Now that he was in control of himself, his words had a slight accent to them. God, this was so strange. Hitoshi Shinso. An odd curved smile came to rest on Midoriya's face. It's nice to meet you, Shinso. He held out his hand, scars running over freckled skin. Hitoshi clasped it, his larger hand practically swallowing the other boy's. Likewise. Somewhere in a poorly lit bar, Tamura Shigaraki sat, scratching his neck as though it had personally offended him. Want to destroy him? The pale man muttered at the news channel which had just shown the #1 hero himself winning another battle. I'm going to destroy him and this stupid world. Kurogiri merely watched the other cautiously, ready to transport any of his precious glasses in case Shigaraki proved to be particularly unstable tonight. All in good time. Came a soothing voice from the TV. We will make them pay, don't you worry. After all, I've made just the right tool for you to destroy All Might. Shigaraki perked up. Really, sensei? You did that for me? The pure reverence in his voice was rare to hear. The screen chuckled. Of course, Tamura, you are, after all, my successor. An unsettling cackle ripped itself free from Shigaraki, hands pausing around his neck for a moment. Yes, yes, it will be glorious. The villain looked towards the news channel, glee clear to see. Glorious. The first time Izuku had used his quirk had also been the day his father had died. He had been sitting on the counter, his mom making dinner while his father watched the news in the living room. Safe, normal, he'd been so happy. The high had worn off when a man had burst through the door. Faster than his young brain had been able to comprehend, his father had leapt to his feet to confront the man while his mom grabbed him and ducked behind the counter. The sounds of a struggle seemed to last forever before a deafening crack rang out and all was still. His father had not been the one to make it out of that encounter. Izuku didn't remember much about what had happened next, and for that he was grateful. What he did gave him nightmares to this day. A hulking figure. His mom pushing him behind her, telling him to run. Run far, far away from this place. the bright red light that seemed to ripple around the man. Overwhelming fear and the urge to pull. He'd blacked out for a minute, and had woken up just in time to realize his mom had thrown him over her shoulder and was making her way out of the house, leaving his motionless father behind. Izuku had seen the lights of many people in his life, and even now, 10 years later, he still thought that his father's light had been the most appealing. It had been so many things at once, Izuku had never wanted to stop looking. Which is why he remembered the exact moment when it went out. At 5 years old, Izuku Midoriya lost his father. The next day him and his mom were on a plane to China. 3 years after that, they moved to India and then to America a year later. It had been a life of constant movement, of being ready to bolt at any given moment. His father had died because his mom's phone had been tapped, making it so the villains had been able to track him, so she made sure nothing like that ever happened again. With a quirk that let him take other people's quirks when he touched them, Hisashi Midoriya had been a very sought-after man in the criminal world, despite his best efforts at remaining unknown. Bad early life choices was all his mom would tell him whenever he asked about why the underground world knew about him at all. His father had been sought after because of his quirk, but a child with a similar one? One that was potentially more powerful? The villain groups were practically foaming at the mouth. They'd been hunted and done their fair share of hunting when necessary. His mom had taught him how to fight, how to keep his head down, when it was okay to take other people's quirks, and how to smile so brightly no one ever suspected that sweet boy and his mother, when two bodies turned up in a river. Inko Midoriya was someone many would describe as soft, or kind, maybe even overly emotional. Izuku had never understood why, because to him his mother was a woman of steel. They never saw the look in her eye when her family was in danger, or the time she took down half a dozen men when they'd taken her child. She was a kind and loving woman, but not one to be trifled with. It hadn't been easy, but it was what they needed to do to survive, and as long as they had each other they would be fine. That life was lonely though, and 10 years after they'd left his mom had decided it was time to go back to her native land, her real home. They'd made plans, set up fake identities and a backstory so that nothing would be suspect when they arrived. At 15 years old, Izuku Midoriya returned to Japan alone. Walking to school with someone else was a simultaneously bizarre and yet pleasant experience. To the surprise of both Shinso and Izuku, they were actually going to the same school, which, considering what school it was, had been a real shock. Who would have guessed that two students attending the most highly admired and rated school in country were homeless and living together in an abandoned warehouse? Living with Shinso had been strange at first, but after discovering they went to the same school, albeit different departments, the two had gotten along quite nicely, Shinso even christening him with the nickname Green Bean, which he, quite frankly, couldn't argue against. Shinso had seemed shocked when Izuku had agreed to live with him, and in all honesty Izuku wasn't sure why he'd agreed to do so himself. He had no reason to trust the other boy. In fact, the first time he'd interacted with Shinso he'd immediately used his quirk on him. In all fairness though, he had been crashing in a place he knew someone was already using, so maybe that didn't really count against him. "Are you excited?" Izuku said, thankful that the taller teen had slowed his steps so that he could more easily keep up. Shinso snorted. "Ah yes, I'm so very eager to being treated as secondary compared to all the Hero Corps students with heroic quirks." Ouch, someone had woken up on the wrong side of the couch? Izuku didn't really know at this point. He was pretty sure Shinso didn't sleep half the time anyway, so did this metaphor even work? Was he spending way too much time thinking about this? Was life just a hallucination he was having? "What about you?" Izuku looked up at Shinso. Excited to be bumping elbows with all the other hirelings? And what was he supposed to say to that? Especially to someone so bitter that he had been denied a chance at his dream over something he couldn't control? How was he supposed to explain that he was terrified that the identification records weren't going to hold up? That someone could figure out what his real quirk was? That he was worried that if someone said or did the wrong thing it would trigger a panic? Heck, you should have gotten into the hero course. He says instead. Shinso nearly tripped over nothing. What? You should have gotten into the hero course. He repeated. That exam was totally biased, even with the rescue points. They could have split non-physical quirks into a different arena or made different exams based on what type of hero you wanted to be. Instead, they just made one that blatantly favored people with physical destructive quirks. Shinso composed himself. A quirk like yours is perfect for it. Yes, the telekinesis quirk that he was pretending to have. Changing records was hard, so he just kept his mom's quirk the same on her papers. It would be easy enough to believe that he'd just developed a stronger form of telekinesis based on the quirk his mother had. Nothing to be suspicious of there, at least as long as you didn't realize that the telekinesis he had was really several quirks working together. Izuku merely hummed in agreement. I am pretty lucky. When has luck ever been on his side? Ochako was completely and totally lost. Seriously, why didn't UA give out maps or something? The school was huge. How was anyone supposed to find their way around here? After wandering for several minutes, she managed to make her way to the correct hallway, and that was when she saw him. Hair as messy as the first time she'd seen him, her savior was standing in front of a classroom door with a look of resignation, an apple in one hand and the doorknob in the other. Hey, she called out. Not startling the slightest bit, the boy turned to look at her, his bright green eyes noticeably duller than the last time she'd seen them. Hi, he said eventually. You Rarika, right? Yup. Ochako grinned. You're in 1A too. I'm glad that there's at least someone I recognize, you know? He nodded but didn't look particularly enthusiastic. She decided not to take it personally. Let's go in together, okay? It'll be less scary that way. A ghost of a smile traced his lips. Sounds like a plan. No sooner did the pair step in the classroom did Ochako know this was going to be a headache. You cannot put your feet on the desk, blustered a large spectacled boy. It is disrespectful to your classmates and to this prestigious institute. The target of his scolding didn't look all that bothered. Shut it, private school. The blonde boy sneered. As the door closed behind them, both of their attention shifted. The blonde blinked in surprise and recognition as he stared at the green-haired boy beside her. Oh my God, she didn't know his name. How stupid could she be? Deku? The blonde blurted, anger momentarily forgotten. Ochako whipped around to look at her companion. For a fraction of a second his eyes were wide in shock. And was that fear? She saw him tense, and it almost looked like he was about to bolt before the moment passed, and his expression smoothed over. What's your full name again? A shadow passed over Deku's? Midoriya. There was a moment of hesitation on the blonde's part before he nodded and accepted it. Ochako felt completely out of the loop. Thankfully, the upright boy with glasses decided it was time to introduce himself. Hello. I am Tenya Ida from Sumai High School. It is a pleasure to meet you. She grinned brightly. Nice to meet you. I'm Ochako Uraraka. Ida then turned his attention to Midoriya. You deciphered the true meaning of the exam. He practically shouted. Clearly, you were the better contestant. If I had known of the rescue points, I would have aided you in your endeavor to get Uraraka out of the rubble. Oh, they must have all been in the same testing arena. So you're saying that you would have only helped someone under threat of extreme injury if you knew you were going to get points for it? While the class hadn't been loud before, the silence was now deafening. That's not Ida sputtered. The sound of Midoriya taking a bite of his apple reverberated around the room. What are you all doing crowded at the front? Ochako squealed and spun to face a yellow caterpillar. A scruffy-looking man unzipped the sleeping bag and stepped out. It took you all 8 seconds to quiet down. You're wasting time and it's illogical. Pulling a gym uniform out of seemingly nowhere, he continued. I'm your homeroom teacher Shota Aizawa. Put these on and meet me outside. Anyone not there within 5 minutes is expelled. With that bombshell, he walked off. At least this'll be interesting. Midoriya commented, taking another bite of his apple. For all of society's talk of weak quirks being useless, the minor quirks Izuku had collected were his favorite. Sure force push, strength and durability were definitely the most useful in a fight, but mental watch and balance made his life much easier. Always knowing what time it was a lifesaver, sometimes literally, and despite all his combat experience, he was still overly clumsy in day-to-day situations, making balance a blessing when he didn't want to make a fool of himself. Not to mention Apple Summoner was almost tied for his favorite quirk. Having something to eat on hand so he didn't have to talk more than necessary did wonders for his anxiety. Plus they made pretty good projectiles, so there was that. After changing as quickly as possible, he didn't want anyone asking about his scars. He made his way down to the field, one of the first ones there. "What do you think this is about?" Uraraka asked, sticking to him like glue. "This is kind of weird. I think he's going to make us fight each other and the losers would be sacrificed to the gods." The people around him turned to stare. "What?" Thankfully, Aizawa interrupts. "Now that you're all here, we can begin." He then started explaining the exercises, with the twist of being able to use their quirks. Not what he expected, but nothing he couldn't handle. But as usual, the universe couldn't just leave it at that. Oh, and last place is getting expelled. Fing. When Izuku had first realized that Aizawa was the hero who had almost caught him committing vigilantism a few weeks ago, he had seriously considered bolting. Even if the man didn't recognize him, something about the hero's quirk light set him on edge. So dark red that it was almost black, it was slow and methodical, giving very little away. Izuku had long learned that while not a strict science, he could often get a surface reading of their personality. Uraraka's was a light and bubbly pink color, Ida's was strong and intense navy blue, Kakuna, Bakuga's was a flashy and forceful orange. He liked having an idea of what he was dealing with, but he wasn't getting anything other than what he would have been able to observe without using his quirk. Izuku wasn't that worried about getting last place if he was being honest. This kind of test was tailored for people with physical quirks, just like the entrance exam. It was a disturbing trend that rubbed him the wrong way. He counted at least 2 people who couldn't use their quirks in almost any of these tests, and the ability to throw a ball really far didn't exactly show their potential to be a hero, so what was Aizawa thinking? "Midoriya, it's your turn to throw. Can I just leave? Is that like an option?" Shota watched as the students completed the tests, noting those that were going to be an issue. The first was obvious. Bakugo had some serious temperamental problems and needed a huge ego check, something he had most likely had never gotten. He was driven though, but all that rage was going to cause problems. Todoroki was also a given. Talented, but considering that Endeavor was his father, that was to be expected. He was easily among the top 2 in the class but wasn't pushing himself. The lack of fire was also a concern, and something that would need to be addressed sooner rather than later. "Midoriya, it's your turn to throw now." The green-haired boy glanced at him before coming to stand in the circle, taking a bite out of an apple he'd seemingly pulled from nowhere. There was another potential problem. While Midoriya lacked the explosive personality and cool arrogance of Bakugo and Todoroki, something about his demeanor rubbed Shota the wrong way. With a powerful quirk like his, he should have more confidence, but the boy was borderline skittish. On its own, he might have been able to leave him be. Not everyone fell into the conventionally powerful quirk confident category, even if it was more common. The problem was that in the gym uniform, the sleeves went up the elbows, and already Shota could see a multitude of scars. Scars in and of itself weren't bad. Accidents were common in this age of quirks, especially when people were young and still figuring out how to use them. But that didn't explain the knife scar, or the bullet one, or the burns. Nor did it explain the hypervigilance he displayed. Biting his lip, the teen in question squeezed the ball tightly as he contemplated the pitch in front of him. "Any day now," Shota called out. Still clasping the apple in his other hand, Midoriya winded up to throw the ball, only to toss it so lightly it barely went out of the circle. "Oh boy." Shudo Todoroki was not sure what the green-haired boy was playing at. Even after clearly displaying some sort of air or telekinesis quirk, the teen had flunked the ball throw so badly, a toddler would have gotten a better score. It was stupid, especially since their teacher didn't seem like the type to put up with any tomfoolery. Aizawa narrowed his eyes. "What was that?" Midoriya's expression didn't change. "I threw the ball. Would you mind explaining why you purposefully flunked your throw?" Aizawa demanded more than asked. Midoriya met his gaze dead on. "I just think this whole thing is kind of stupid," he said, drawing gasps from his classmates. Like, I get the whole, find creative ways to use your quirks, but this is like one of the worst ways to do it. What are people with non-physical quirks supposed to do? This isn't an accurate way to measure our ability or drive. He was challenging a teacher? One who had threatened to expel a student just for coming last in this strange test? Was he really this dumb? Aizawa's expression was unreadable. And how exactly are you proving your point by purposefully failing your throw? Is this a rhetorical question, or do you actually want to know? A brown-haired girl with a bob cut was nervously biting her lip as she watched, clearly worrying over the fate of the other teen. Shudo didn't understand that either. If the short boy was sent home, there was a higher chance that no one else would be and she would be safe. Are you trying to be difficult? Aizawa asked. Throw the ball already. I don't have a ball. Midoriya pointed out. It's over there. He gestured to the aforementioned object a few feet in front of him. Was he really this stupid? Were all other kids his age this tactless? Maybe it was for the best that his SPRM donor had had him homeschooled if this was the average intellect. Hurry the F up, Deku, screamed the blonde with an explosion quirk. Stop wasting everyone's time. Flinching slightly, the short boy Deku turned to face him. This is actually the last test and I'm the last person to take it, he said. So nobody's going after me. Don't get smart with me, Dash. The blonde lunged, and for a fraction of an instant Shudo saw something that set alarms blaring in his head. Instead of jerking back, or something similar, Deku's eyes became incredibly cold, his hand shooting forward as if to grab. Before the two could connect, a thin white scarf wrapped around the blonde. Eyes glowing red, Aizawa scowled. You're giving me dry eye, he growled. You attack another student outside of mandated exercises and you'll be expelled, do you understand? The explosive teen mumbled something vaguely affirmative. But also I was lying about the expulsion. We're done for today. The following outburst was cut short by their teacher's glare, but Shudo wasn't watching them. Midoriya had reverted back to the mostly blank but somewhat nervous state he'd been in before, but Shudo wasn't about to forget the momentary viciousness. In that split second he knew that the other boy had been about to grab the blonde's throat, and while he hadn't been the aggressor, Shudo didn't doubt he would have finished the fight. I'll need to watch out for him. Shudo looked at the clock. They'd been dismissed early, meaning they could go home now. When had it ever been a home? When had it ever been anything other than a prison? If you had told Hitoshi that he was going to be mugged on the way home from school, he might have believed you. If you had then said he was going to be saved by the same boy who had broken into his house and who was seemingly the embodiment of not giving if, while simultaneously being the most anxious person he'd ever met, he would have probably told you to F off. Staring down at the unconscious body of his would-be attacker, Hitoshi watched in disbelief as Midoriya relieved the man of his wallet before calling the police. You just took that dude's stuff, he said when he got over his initial shock. I'm pretty sure that's illegal. Midoriya merely shrugged. So is lying on your school papers, but neither of us had a problem with that. Touché. Besides, it's not like we don't need it. We can't live off of only apples and instant ramen. Hitoshi snorted. You ever going to tell me where you get those? Nope, he said, popping the pea. That's for me to know, and if you ever find out I'd have to kill you. Midoriya said it jokingly, but Hitoshi wouldn't help but hear the slight undertone to his words. Don't ask about this, or about what just happened. Despite looking like he couldn't harm a fly, the second the man had pulled Hitoshi into the alley, Midoriya had grabbed the mugger by his hair and slammed his head into the wall quicker than he'd been able to even register he was under attack. Efficient and brutal, not to mention there hadn't been the slightest bit of hesitation in his movements. They'd been practiced, smooth, and even after the event he didn't look uneasy or remotely shaken. You know, for such a cute guy, you're pretty scary. And just like that, the calm and controlled teen tripped over his own feet and would have fallen flat on his face had Hitoshi not grabbed the back of his shirt. What? Midoriya stuttered, his freckled skin tinted pink. Hitoshi leaned down, smirking. I said you're cute. His face darkened in color and Midoriya looked everywhere but at Hitoshi, his hand fidgeting nervously. Oh, he said in a strangled voice. Something the matter, green bean? Hitoshi asked, purposefully lowering his voice. You look a little hot. Another unintelligible noise escaped the smaller teen as he backed away. Stop it, Shinso. He muttered, trying to cover his face. Letting out a low laugh, Hitoshi continued walking. Whatever you say, Green Bean. He was definitely filing that away for later use. Thankfully for Izuku's stress levels, the following morning did not include any expulsion threats or long-lost childhood friends popping up from nowhere. Instead, classes like math and English filled the time, the latter being a breath of fresh air. Living in America for several years had made him fluent in the language, so it would be a breeze. After eating lunch with Shinso, this is the best thing I've ever eaten. He had bemoaned. Lunch rush is officially my favorite hero. He begrudgingly made his way back to class for Foundation Heroics. He wasn't sure what to expect, but if he was lucky it would just be basic hand-to-hand combat. That's reasonable, right? Teaching them the basics before doing anything crazy. The second All Might burst into the room shouting, I am coming through the door like a normal person. Any and all hopes of getting a normal lesson were dashed. The excited chatter continued all the way to the changing rooms, his classmates eager to put on their hero costumes and be taught a lesson from the All Might. It wasn't like Izuku didn't understand the hype. Being the #1 hero in Japan was no easy task, not to mention holding his position for decades and being the symbol of peace. He respected the man and acknowledged that he was a good hero. The man was just a little too flashy for his tastes. Not to mention loud. There was something strange about his light though. Izuku had expected it to be blinding in its intensity, overwhelming to the senses and almost irresistible to grab. While he had been right about the intensity, the quirk seemed almost sickly and was compacted in a way he hadn't seen before. It was almost like multiple quirks in one, and while it was incredible, Izuku wasn't the slightest bit tempted to take it. Putting on his hero costume felt strange in more than one way. He wasn't used to fighting in anything other than civilian clothes, so having any type of gear felt strange. Not to mention he felt uncomfortable in anything that would make him stick out, and a hero costume did exactly that. Sure, it was helpful in a fight, but you got into less of those if you were inconspicuous. He'd gone with a black long-sleeved shirt with padding on both arms, as well a pair of camo green cargo briefs with lots of pockets. His jacket was also dark green with a hood and even more pockets, his bandana the same color. The whole thing was heat-resistant as well as shock-absorbent. Izuku was mildly surprised they had actually listened to his request for throwing knives and Swiss Army knives, but he wasn't about to complain. Oh my god, is that you, Midoriya? Uraraka gushed, rushing over to him. You look so cool, like a ninja or something. Not what he'd been going for, but whatever. I like the space theme. He commented. But why heels? She groaned. Yeah, I really should have been more specific. With my costume, it's a lot tighter than I want, and I don't know why they gave me these shoes. Well, it was reassuring that she hadn't chosen the debilitating footwear, but mildly concerning that they had given them to her at all. Now that he thought about it, there were a lot of their classmates whose costumes were useless at best, hindering at worst. I'm sure if you ask for changes, they'll fix it. Uraraka looked away. I don't want to be a bother. Why was he doing this? He was not good at encouragement. Someone with more confidence and social skills take over, please. Resigned to be the voice of reason, he sighed. Hey, this is what you're going to be wearing often, and if you're not comfortable, that's a problem. There's nothing wrong with wanting it to be changed, especially if it's something like switching heels for something more sensible. I've never worn them, but I wouldn't count on them being great for running. Uraraka blinked in surprise, but before she could respond, All Might called for them to gather around. Today we are going to be doing battle trials. Many fights on TV are shown outside, but the more sinister villains are often indoors. That's why today we will be doing 2-on-2 team battles. Villains versus heroes. How are we determining victory? How badly can we hurt the other team? Are you going to threaten to expel people? Isn't my cape fabulous? Don't all talk at once. The #1 hero shouted. My quirk isn't super hearing. He pulled out a sheet of paper and then began to explain the exercise in more depth. Is this really the best way to determine teams? The student wearing armor, which he only now realized was Ida, asked. The black-haired girl with some type of creation quirk crossed her arms. Heroes don't always get to choose who they team up with. She pointed out. It would be useful to be able to work with anyone on the fly. I see. I apologize for my interruption, said Ida, bowing. Does he always have to yell? The lots were drawn and teams were decided. Team Androgyninja. Team B, Shoji and Mineta. Team C, Koda and Sato. Team D, Shiro and Kirishima. Team E, Mina and Aoyama. Team F, Ojiro and Hagakure. Team G, Todoroki and Uraraka. Team H, Midoriya and Jiro. Team I, Tokoyami and Azui. Team J, Kaminari and Yaoyorozu. The first two teams to fight were teams D and A, the latter being chosen as the villains. Izuku couldn't help but feel mildly sympathetic towards Shiro and Kirishima. While he didn't doubt they were capable or strong, but Bakugo was ruthless and would do anything to win. Kirishima put up a good fight, and Shiro had nearly gotten past him, but in the end both were blasted into oblivion. Ida hadn't even needed to move from his position guarding the bomb. Thankfully, they were both gracious in their defeat and didn't seem to take it too badly. Next was Team C versus J, and it wasn't even close. Yaoyorozu had set up traps around the bomb along with conductors for Kaminari's electricity, and despite their best efforts, Koda and Sato were defeated. Then it was Tokoyami and Azui versus Mina and Aoyama, the former team winning. After each match, All Might asked for commentary and who was MVP, which he would have seen as him encouraging their analysis skills, but honestly just felt like the man had no idea and was grasping at straws. Thankfully, both Yaoyorozu and himself were more than happy to fill in the blanks. It was honestly exciting to see his classmates in action. Their quirks were so interesting and versatile, everyone seemingly having a decent idea of how to apply them in various circumstances. The lack of strategy used was disappointing, Yaoyorozu being the exception, but nonetheless it was fascinating. Next will be Team B versus Team H. All Might announced. Kyuko wasn't sure what to make of Midoriya. He kept to himself and shied away whenever people got close, but had called out the teacher that had threatened to expel them. He spoke to Uraraka so quietly the only reason she'd even heard him was because of her quirk, yet had broken down the tactics of the other teams so thoroughly even All Might had looked impressed. He was so contradictory it made her head spin, and now she was supposed to be his partner. "What's your quirk?" he asked, his voice lilting with a subtle accent. As she explained, he listened attentively with a blank look on his face. She felt mildly uncomfortable at his emotionless face but put it aside. They had an exercise to complete. "My quirk is a simple telekinesis," he said once she was done. "I can make things float, pull them towards me and send things flying the other way. My current weight limit is higher than we'll need, so that won't be a problem." "Do you have a strategy?" she asked. The slightest hint of a grin spread across his face. Mizo wished he had a different partner. Not only was Mineta unobservant when it came to what their opponent's quirks were, he had heard the small boy salivating over Yaoyorozu during her fight, hopping her costume ripped. Hearing disgusting things was one of the hazards of having enhanced hearing, but having someone he was supposed to work with act like that made him want to launch Mineta out a window. Despite that, he had to admit that his quirk was useful for traps. They'd practically coated the room with the bomb with his sticky purple ball, leaving little likelihood anyone could get through without getting stuck low. "They're coming up," Mizo informed him. "Jiro can probably hear us, so there's not much use in trying to hide." Mineta's face lit up at the mention of a girl, and he hid his disgust. "We should split up," he said. "You go after them and I'll stay with the bomb." It sounded like a ploy to avoid fighting, but it was an excuse to get away from the purple rat, so Mizo didn't mind. He listened to their movements and managed to track the two down, settling into a stance. "You'll have to get past me." Mizo tried to ignore the shiver that ran down his back as Midoriya smiled, instead focusing on Jiro as she stepped forward, her ear jacks extending to her boots. The following sound wave made him wince, but he held his ground. He didn't trust Mineta to beat the two of them, and if he could finish this now, all the better. He rushed forward, ignoring the pain, and swiped. If he could distract Jiro, then she would hopefully stop using her quirk. The two separated and Jiro sent out another blast, louder this time. When his head finally cleared, he realized that Midoriya was nowhere to be seen. All Might was impressed at young Midoriya's strategy. If he hadn't read the student's files, he would not have guessed that young Shoji would be weak to Jiro's sound blasts, but it did make sense. Those with sensitive hearing would be more affected than the average person, and thus it had given Midoriya a chance to get past the larger boy. The heroes were on a time limit, so any time wasted could be the difference between victory and defeat, so splitting up made sense. Jiro was clearly capable of holding her own against Shoji, methodically sending sound waves towards him to prevent the giant from chasing after her teammate. She had told him where the bomb was located at the very beginning of the exercise, her enhanced hearing able to pinpoint the villain's location, and young Midoriya had clearly listened. He found Mineta and the room with the bomb in it, the two now facing off as the latter threw his purple ball at Midoriya frantically, the boy in question dodging them with apparent ease. There was something strangely familiar about him, his curly hair and freckles nagging at him for a reason he couldn't explain. The way he looked at others reminding him of something he couldn't name. Still, that wasn't any reason to dislike the boy. He would make a good successor. The one for all, Holder mused, remembering how he'd acted during the entrance exam. He has a true heroic spirit. No sooner than the thought had been formed, Midoriya kneed Mineta's face into the wall. Izuku had seen a lot of shit. Living on the run left a lot to be desired, and unfortunately he was all too familiar with people like Mineta. His mother had explained to him at a very young age to not trust adults he didn't know, and he realized why a lot sooner than he probably should have. He remembered all too well the look in the eyes of the men who had tried to take him, who had managed to touch him before he managed to escape and run far, far away. It was a look of greed, of no regard for the wants of others, and it made his stomach churn uncomfortably. So when Izuku had heard the smaller boy pray that the girls' costumes would rip, a familiar rage had bubbled within him, the feeling only amplifying when Mineta loudly complained that it wasn't Jiro he got to fight. Izuku didn't like hurting people, and mainly saw fighting as an unavoidable necessity for survival, but he might make an exception for this little pervert. Mineta let out a battle cry as he began launching his quirk ball at him, not pausing even when it was clear that he wasn't getting anywhere. Force push was making easy work of the projectiles, sending them into the walls instead of his face, and even if he missed one, he was using speed just in case. Izuku knew better than to let his temper get the better of him, but the little rat wasn't making it easy. As tempting as it was to just beat him, he knew if he showed the full extent to his fighting prowess, it would raise red flags and he would be beholden to questions he didn't have any good way of answering. "Ah man. This is so unfair." Mineta griped. "Come on man, I didn't even get to see Jiro's stash." A loud crack rung through the hallway as Izuku's knee connected with his opponent's face. Katsuki Bakugo was well aware he was an a-hole. People may think he was unaware of how dickish he was, but in truth he just didn't care. They were all useless extras who were going to be his stepping stones to greatness, so who cared what they thought? No one dared challenge him and no one could beat him, so their opinions didn't matter. It hadn't always been that way though. In the beginning of his childhood he could remember that stupid Effenji Deku standing up to him and refusing to submit, even when his quirk had come in and declared him superior to the rest. The shitty nerd's quirk had been late and he'd never actually found out what it was, because shortly after they turned 5, both he and his mother disappeared off the face of the planet, leaving behind the body of Auntie Inko's husband. After they'd left, there had been no one to challenge Katsuki, and Deku had been forgotten. He just hadn't expected the shitty nerd to show up in UA of all places, with a powerful quirk and a blank look on his face. It wasn't even close to how he used to be, a stuttering, crying wimp with barely any backbone, and it set Katsuki off. How dare he just vanish and show up again? This was where he was supposed to shine, not get outshined by a wimp who was always forgot his place and was constantly looking down on him. The FANG exercise didn't last much longer after Deku basically caved the grape rat's head in with his knee. The little beach hadn't bothered getting up after that hit, leaving Deku to leisurely make his way over to the bomb and place his hand on it, All Might declaring their victory. Ponytail went on and on about the strategies and who was the MVP and all that shit, but Katsuki wasn't paying attention, too busy glaring a hole in Deku's head, not that the shitty nerd reacted. And the final teams to fight will be Team G as the heroes and Team F as the villains. What happened next couldn't be called a fight, it was a FENG massacre. The half-N half-BSD froze the entire goddamn building, and Invisibitch and Tailfucker weren't able to get out of it at all. Roundface hadn't even had to do anything. Of course the FING extras around him were impressed, even Ponytail looked hesitant to critic him. FING typical. Well, that was completely unnecessary. As much as Ochako had been in awe of Todoroki's display of power and control, she'd been a little miffed that she hadn't been able to actually do something. It was a teamwork exercise after all, and she'd done absolutely nothing. It was disheartening, especially after seeing Midoriya's match where he'd come up with a plan and disabled the bomb. There wasn't much she could do though, she'd just have to try harder next time. Well, that was completely unnecessary. It seemed as though the entire room froze at the words, everyone turning to look at a seemingly unaffected Midoriya, munching on a ripe red apple. Todoroki narrowed his eyes. "Would you care to elaborate?" he asked, his voice as cold as his ice. "Sure." Midoriya didn't look at all intimidated by the boy who had eliminated his opponents in less than a minute. "First off, you froze the entire building, which was not only unnecessary, but hindered your partner." He took another bite of his apple. "You could have just found out where the villains were and froze them. Even if Hagakure is invisible, she'd have to show herself eventually to stop you from getting the bomb." Todoroki didn't outwardly respond, but Ochako got the feeling he was seething. "That would have taken longer," he bit out. Midoriya didn't so much as blink, but would have prevented a lot of property damage. In a real-life scenario they would have had to wait for the ice to melt and then deal with what it had ruined. An entire building isn't cheap, and depending on what was going on in there you could have destroyed a lot of data. A smaller, more focused attack would have made much more sense while minimizing the potential destruction of evidence as well as make less work for the poor people who have to clean up after you. It worked, didn't it? Todoroki almost sneered. A ghost of a smile traced Midoriya's lips. "So, in your opinion, the ends justify the means?" Todoroki opened his mouth to respond, only to be interrupted by All Might. "Thank you for your input, young Midoriya." He clapped his hands together. "That's all for today's training. Have a good day." And with an up kick of dust, the #1 hero zoomed away. Tuya Todoroki Dabi was not having a good time. Not only had his apartment been robbed, he didn't know why they had bothered. There wasn't anything worth taking in there, but his boss had cut his hours, so he'd be rationing his money even more strictly. Oh, and there was currently a man trying to kill him. Dabi hadn't expected that his intervention of a shakedown would lead to the perpetrator going berserk, but he supposed he should have assumed. He had sheet luck. Ever since hearing about Stain, Dabi had been inspired to follow in the man's footsteps. He began stopping the crime he saw around his neighborhood, and there was plenty of that. He didn't exactly live in the safest area of Hosu, so there was no shortage of muggings, rapes, and other actions from the deplorables of the world. He usually just threatened to set them on fire and they ran off, but today seemed like the world was saying F you, so of course that didn't happen. His back hit the wall behind him and barely managed to dodge the fist that punched a hole in the concrete where he'd just been. Lower temperatures of fire were ineffective against the man. His quirk, some type of hardening and hand-to-hand combat against someone like that, was not going to end well for him. Dabi staggered back, grimacing as he prepared to summon more fire than he had in years. It would probably do more damage to him than the man would, but if he was going to die, then he was taking this BSTRD with him. "Get down!" Years of abuse training were the only reason he was able to duck fast enough to avoid the armor-clad figure that shot over him. It was hard not to gawk as the hero stood between Dabi and his attacker. Why would anyone ever care about what happened to him moving swiftly and efficiently as they took the man down? It wasn't much of a fight if he was being honest. No matter how strong the guy's quirk was, he was no match for a pro. His gut churned when he saw how easily the hero took the man down. Failure, weak, worthless. "Are you all right?" Ingenium asked, turning to face him. "You hit that wall pretty hard." Dabi took another step back. "I'm fine," he said roughly. "Shouldn't you be saving people closer to cameras?" "Stupid heroes." pretending to be all that when the only heroes that even occasionally hung around these parts were the underground ones. Strangely, Ingenium didn't object. "Don't remind me," he groaned. "Those media vultures keep asking our agency for an interview and they keep intervening with our work." "So you're only here to avoid getting harassed?" he sneered. Even though he had a helmet on, Dobby got the sense that he was smiling. "I come here whenever I manage to convince my PR department that patrolling high-density areas is almost useless with all the hero presence. They keep telling me that it's not good for my popularity, and I have to keep reminding them that my job is to help people." Dobby blinked. "You're awfully relaxed about smack-talking your own agency." Ingenium let out a booming laugh. "I guess I am. Don't go spreading this around, yeah? That last thing I need is the media catching wind and trying to make it into a scandal." He looked Dobby in the eye, something very few people did. "Are you sure you're okay? This might sound rude, but I noticed that a few of your staples came off." Tension flooded his frame again. "Not exactly like I have much choice in wearing them." He bit out. True. Ingenium didn't seem at all put off. "Do you want me to escort you to a hospital? I'm sure they can put it back in." Why was he being so nice? He shouldn't even be in this area to begin with, and he gained nothing by helping Dobby. He shook his head. "I have stuff at home. Don't let me keep you from your job, hero." Ingenium studied him. For a long moment. "If you say so," he said eventually. "Have a nice day." As the scarred young man watched him pick up the unconscious body and speed away, he couldn't help but think of Stain. Maybe there are true heroes out there. Midoriya. Wait up." Hitoshi tensed as he heard his roommate's name being called as a brown-haired girl and a tall boy jogged after them. "Do you know them?" he asked. Midoriya nodded. "They're in my class. I don't know why they're looking for me though." They waited for the two to catch up, the girl breathing slightly when she finally stopped. "I wanted to see if you wanted to walk to the train station with us," she explained. "Uraraka. It is rude to ignore Midoriya's company," the tall boy boomed. "I am Tenya Ida of the UA Hero course. It is a pleasure to meet you. Wow, this guy is extra. Hitoshi Shinso." He drawled lazily. "General studies. For now." "I'm so sorry," the brown-haired girl who he assumed was Uraraka squeaked. "I didn't mean to be rude, I'm Ochako Uraraka." Hitoshi shrugged. "Anyway," she clapped her hands together, "we were wondering if you wanted to join us on our way to the train station." "You're welcome to, of course," she added, glancing at Hitoshi. He exchanged a look with Midoriya. "We don't take the train," Midoriya said, speaking for the first time. "We walk home together. More like we can't afford the train." Uraraka looked unperturbed. "That's fine. We need to go this way anyway, and I figured it would be a good way to get to know people better." Oh God, she's one of those. While Hitoshi didn't dislike bubbly people on principle, their constant energy could get exhausting very quickly. Thankfully, she seemed content to just chat with Ida as all four of them walked. He was surprised to find out that she was living alone as well and felt a pang of sympathy. Even if she was staying in an apartment with heating and water, he knew what it was like to have no one waiting at home for you. "I can't believe you got All Might teaching you." He couldn't help but interrupt when they began talking about their foundational heroics class. "That's actually insane. You hero course kids get everything." If they noticed the bitter note in his voice, they didn't comment. "It was pretty crazy." Uraraka agreed. He seemed a little awkward though, like he wasn't sure what he was doing. "It is a wonderful opportunity to learn from the #1 hero," Ida said, arms chopping wildly. "He must have an immense amount of information about heroics." Hitoshi swore he heard Midoriya snort. "And I can't believe you went after Todoroki like that," he continued. "While I agree he could have improved, the way you delivered your criticism was hostile." An unreadable look flashed in Midoriya's eyes. "Some people don't listen unless you force them to." There was a long pause of silence. "This is us," Uraraka said with forced cheer, starting towards the station. "See you tomorrow, Midoriya. It was nice to meet you, Shinso." Hitoshi watched them go, a small smirk on his face. "You roasted the son of Endeavor to his face." I am so mad I didn't get to see that. Midoriya chuckled quietly. They make it sound worse than it was. I just pointed out what could be improved and why. It's not my fault there was a lot of that to say. He snickered. You are deceivingly sassy. Midoriya shrugged, but Hitoshi saw the grin he was attempting to hide. Wanna get some ice cream? He asked, ruffling Midoriya's hair. Yes please. Reviewing the battle trials All Might had supervised made Shota wanna bash his head into a wall. Most of the issues were things that would be fixed over time and were typical of a first-year hero class: lack of strategy and teamwork, not to mention over-reliance on quirks. Those were things that would be fixed over time with the right training and guidance, and was not why he felt like downing a bottle of whiskey. Bakuga's temper needed to be curbed and his ego squashed down to a manageable size. He seemed to be under the impression that he didn't need others and that they were below him, and that was not something Shota would tolerate in any way, shape, or form. It didn't help that the boy was clearly a hard worker and knew exactly how strong he was. This would need to be addressed carefully. The possibility of this blowing up in their faces was too high to ignore, and Shota was not looking forward to that conversation. Mineta was quickly becoming an issue as well, but at least it was one he had expected. There had been no official reports regarding his behavior just yet, but Shota had overheard Yaoyorozu commenting that he made her uncomfortable and how he kept staring at her in her hero costume. It was frustrating not being able to do anything, but he didn't have a valid enough reason according to the school board to expel him just yet, so he'd have to bide his time. What you got there? Nemuri leaned over his desk. You usually don't look this annoyed until the second week of school. Snipe snorted. That's because he expels half the class and then realizes the ones he kept aren't any better. Shota glared at them both. Could you save this for when I finished watching? He asked. I still need to play the rest of the fight with Mineta, Midoriya, Jiro, and Shoji. Oh, let me see. Hizashi rushed over from his desk. There aren't usually any sound-based quirks that make it through the entrance exam. And I want to see the kid that destroyed the zero-pointer. Nemuri liked her lips. That steak dinner was so good. I'm surrounded by children. Shota complained, clicking the play button anyway. He had watched enough videos to know how it would start. The villain team would get time to prepare before the heroes would be sent in. The planning on Midoriya's part was impressive, especially for a first year. He seemed to take into account everyone's quirks, not to mention being able to identify and analyze them to begin with. The villains separated and Shoji and the heroes clashed. Jiro did an admirable job keeping the larger boy back and providing a distraction for Midoriya to slip away without badly hurting her opponent. Shoji did the best he could given the circumstances, that matchup being one of the worst he could have gotten. Shota wasn't surprised when the teen in question was able to avoid Mineta's quirk, but he hadn't been expecting what followed. Holy shit! Hizashi exclaimed. That was ruthless. Shota eyed the whimpering form of Mineta and couldn't help but agree. The move itself wasn't a problem, but the lack of hesitation and regret Midoriya exhibited was concerning. I'll keep an eye on him, he said eventually. Hizashi kissed his forehead. I'm sure it's nothing to worry about. He probably just accidentally put too much power into the blow. I hope so. He replayed the clip. I really hope so. Everything hurts. Hitoshi groaned. Goddamn, Green Bean, I didn't expect you to be such a SLV driver. He had had no idea that asking his roommate for physical training would end up with Wei. He was aware that Midoriya had to have had some type of physical training, that much was obvious, but he hadn't expected him to be so DMN vicious. Hitoshi was no stranger to pain. It had been a constant companion ever since he was young. If it wasn't from those deadbeats he called parents, then the kids at school made sure he knew exactly what they thought of him. He was unfamiliar, however, with the overwhelming ache in his arms and legs from Midoriya drilling him over and over again. He was pretty sure he had more bruises now than he'd had when he'd broken his dad's nose, and that was saying something. That was nothing, however, compared to how much his head was spinning. Midoriya had asked him so many questions about his quirk that he'd had no idea how to answer. It wasn't like he got a lot of volunteers to be brainwashed, so he had no idea if he could make people fall asleep, if laughter counted as a response, how long he could control someone, how many people he could, how complicated the tasks he could make them complete could be, or if he could make them do things outside of their regular capabilities. It made him incredibly frustrated. The only reason he didn't want to go scream into the void was because he'd managed to answer a lot of those questions. Turns out he could make someone fall asleep, laughter did count as a response, and he could make people complete complicated tasks as long as they were normally capable of doing so. Your quirk is so useful. Midoriya had gushed. The possibilities are almost endless. You can stop villains without using violence, talk down suicidal people, and resolve hostage situations. Oh, and don't get me started on interrogations. Hitoshi had been overwhelmed. While the other teen had expressed that he had thought he should have been placed in the hero course, it was another thing entirely to have someone think of ways to improve his quirk and actually volunteer to test those ideas. I'm taking your phone if you die, Midoriya said without mercy. He took a deep breath and immediately regretted it. You're heartless, he wheezed. Midoriya gave him one of his rare sincere smiles. You did really well. For someone who's a literal stick, you have good reflexes. Hitoshi clutched his heart dramatically. You wound me. He studied Midoriya. And you have no legs to stand on. You're not much better. Midoriya rolled his eyes. Get off the ground, we still need to stretch or it'll feel even worse in the morning. He began explaining the stretches, going through each of them slowly so that Hitoshi could feel the burn in his muscles. He couldn't help but notice that Midoriya was able to go a lot deeper in his stretches than he could. It wasn't that surprising after today, but he really hadn't expected him to be able to do the splits. He let out a low whistle. Diamen green bean. You really are flexible. The movement was causing his shirt to ride up and display the pale freckled flesh of his abdomen, and Hitoshi had to force himself to look away. Thankfully, Midoriya didn't seem to notice. Flexibility is useful in a fight, he explained. My mom always made sure I stretched properly and kept up with it. I was really rubbery as a kid and I just went from there. Midoriya smoothly got to his feet. That should be good for now. Hitoshi stumbled upright gracelessly, his legs feeling about as stable as a newborn fawn. I'm pretty sure this shirt is ruined. It was covered in dirt, and sweat was making it stick to his chest. It had never been a great shirt to begin with and was now a definite contender for the trash bag. Midoriya tossed a wet rag along with a replacement t-shirt at him, already taking his own off. I'm just glad we had rain a few days ago. Hitoshi had to agree. Their washing water had grown pretty low as of late and he didn't really want to be caught taking water from school. That would lead to a lot of unpleasant questions. Prying the disgusting garment from his body, he began wiping down his chest, shivering as the cold water dripped down his torso. It wasn't so distracting, however, that it prevented him from noticing Midoriya watching him. Like what you see, he teased. A bright red flush overtook his features, spreading all the way to his collarbones as the Midoriya let out an embarrassed whine. There was still water on him and a warm feeling spread in Hitoshi's gut. He sauntered closer to the blushing boy, gently prying Midoriya's hand away from his face. Don't hide from me, Hitoshi murmured. I want to see you. His skin darkened and Hitoshi could hear his breathing become uneven. Midoriya was looking everywhere but at him, and he nervously licked his lips, staying perfectly still. Hitoshi leaned down towards him so that his mouth was level with the Midoriya's ear. Gently tapping a spot on his chest, he whispered, You missed a spot. The warehouse was silent enough that he could hear Midoriya gulp. Shinso was going to be the death of him. It had been several days since he'd asked him to train him, and he still could barely look Shinso in the eye. Izuka knew he was just joking around and probably practicing ways to get people to talk for his quirk, but his poor by heart didn't realize that, and if he continued he feared he was going to implode one of these days. Even worse, the press had been crowding the front of the school. He'd taken one look at that and decided to go for another entrance. He was nearly late for class, but it would have been worth the detention. Aizawa walked in with his usual lack of ceremony, the class silencing at his glare. He pulled out several packets of paper and began placing them on the students' desks. Each of these are detailed evaluations from your performances during the battle trials. Read them before tomorrow and work on the issues that were pointed out. He paused at Izuku's desk, dark eyes studying him a moment too long before abruptly turning away. Well, that didn't raise my stress levels by 1000% or anything. Now on to some homeroom business. You need to choose a class president. Oh, thank God it's something normal. Even as the noise in the room increased exponentially, Izuku was just glad that it wasn't going to be something insane. The position of class president is an important one. Just because you want it does not mean you are qualified. Ida exclaimed loudly. A class president has to have the trust of the class, so it should be decided democratically. He paused, having just realized that he was being as loud as those he was chastising. Is that all right, sensei? With the amount of care Izuku had come to expect from their teacher, Aizawa shrugged. I don't care as long as you do it before homeroom ends. Thank you. Azui tapped her chin. But won't everyone just vote for themselves? It's not like we know each other very well, Karo. That is true, but that is how we know that whoever gets the most votes is the most appropriate for the role. Ida explained. Izuku could understand that line of thinking, but it still might end up being a popularity contest, and he wasn't sure if they could remove the president in the case that they were unqualified. He decided not to voice his concerns, seeing as he didn't really have a better option. Yaoyorozu seemed like the best option to choose, so he wrote her name out and handed the slip of paper back to be counted. Ida began tallying the counts and... Well, that wasn't supposed to happen. Yaoyorozu, 3. Ida, 0. Midoriya, I. Mina, I. Kaminari, I. Azui, I. Midoriya will be class president. Ida announced. Tenya was still reeling when lunch rolled around. How could Midoriya just resign his position? And why would he do so? He was clearly qualified and had shown to be quite adept at strategy and combat, so there was no reason for him to quit. Of course, he was glad that he had gained the position of vice president from the Greenette's decision, but he felt that he didn't deserve it. Uraraka was determined to chase the boy down for lunch, so he supposed he could ask him then. Midoriya. Shinso. Uraraka called out, making her way through the crowd. Wait up. Neither turned around, and if Tenya didn't know better he would have actually thought the pair to have sped up. Thankfully, Uraraka wasn't going to budge in her mission and plopped her tray on the same table as them. Can we sit here? She asked. Shinso rolled his eyes. I don't see why not, seeing as you've already made yourself at home. Midoriya didn't even look up from his food, choosing instead to continue munching his rice. He was hunched over and his dark hair fell over his eyes so Tenya couldn't see them. He decided to wait until Midoriya was done eating to bring up what had happened in homeroom. After all, it would be very rude to interrupt someone when they were in the process of acquiring their necessary nutrients. Uraraka seemed content to banter with Shinso, who occasionally making biting comments that Tenya would have scolded him for if not for the mirth glinting in his eyes. Are you planning on trying to get transferred to the hero course? She asked. Oh, what if you join our class? Shinsu's answering grin was unsettling. That's the plan. He drawled. General studies kids can SW's over if we do well enough in the sports festival, so you hero kids should watch out. Uraraka's eyes lit up. Bring it. There was a lull in the conversation, and just as Tenya was about to ask Midoriya about his decision, the other spoke first. Why do you guys want to be heroes? Tenya straightened, eager to answer. I am from the Ida family. He announced. My older brother is in Genium and my parents are the hero duo of Idayton Agency. I hope to continue my family name and do my family proud. Oh, so you're a rich kid? Shinso said with a snort. That makes a lot of sense. Midoriya's eyes flashed with something unreadable. My reason's nothing so noble. Uraraka confessed. My family is really poor, and if I become a hero, I'll have a lot of money and they'll be able to live comfortably. That is a perfectly acceptable reason. Tenya exclaimed. Wanting to help your family is very admirable. I'm doing it out of spite. Shinso volunteered. Both Uraraka and Midoriya snorted and Tenya was about to chastise them all when a blaring alarm went off. Midoriya was on his feet in an instant, dragging Shinso in front of the ensuing crowd as a speaker blared. There has been a level 3 breach. Please evacuate promptly. There were too many people. It was so loud, but at the same time he could barely hear anything over the ringing in his ears. Oriya. Midoriya. Izuku felt someone grab his arm, but everything was blurry, so he couldn't tell who. His legs felt like jelly and he couldn't breathe. He was vaguely aware of someone pulling him through the crush of the crowd and then tossing him into a room and closing the door. There were hands on his shoulders shaking him, but nothing was making sense. Everything was too bright and loud and he couldn't breathe. Izuku, please talk to me, please say anything. There was something purple in front of him. What was purple? Oh yeah, he had a friend who was purple. He kind of wanted to grab the purple. He couldn't talk. Nothing felt right and his body was all wrong. Why couldn't he breathe? Izuku, look at me. He didn't want to move. Everything hurt. Why did everything always hurt? Two warm hands grasped his face. You can do it, the purple soothed him. Come on, just say something. Mom dash. No, this wasn't Mom. Mom was white, not purple. It hurts. Purple let out a sigh. I know, just trust me, okay? When Shota had been told by the all-knowing rat known as Nedzu that he should go check the teacher's lounge after kicking the reporters off UA property, he hadn't been expecting one of his problematic students and one he didn't recognize crouching on the floor. As he opened the door, the purple-haired boy startled from his position next to Midoriya, body shifting to hide the other from view. Still, he could see the boy sitting with Ramrod's straight posture and the blank look in the boy's eyes. Shota slowed his approach, purposefully softening his features and making sure his hands were invisible. He didn't know this student, and from the tension in his body, startling him was a bad idea. Are you two all right? He asked, leaving a large enough distance for the teen to feel comfortable. The boy glanced at Midoriya. We got caught in the evacuation crowd and he started acting weird. He bit his lip. I pulled him into here and he was freaking out. I don't think he was breathing properly, and it was only getting worse. Shota gestured for him to continue. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't talk him down, so I put him under my quirk. He winced. I tried to release it a few times, but it just started up again. Oh Christ, this was going to be a mess. What's your quirk? He asked. The boy flinched minutely and looked away. Brainwashing. That explained things. How does it activate? Hopefully it was something he could reactivate if this went wrong. I just need a verbal response. He explained. He's still aware right now, but everything is much more muted, and I ordered him to breathe. Shota came closer and dropped into a crouch. So he can hear me? Yes. He was going to have to handle this carefully. Panic attacks were something he'd had to deal with more than once, but it was never pleasant. Can you release him? After a moment the boy let out a sharp sigh, and the change was immediate. Midoriya began hyperventilating and his hands came up to tug on his hair. The blankness in his eyes was replaced by panic as he began shaking violently. This was worse than he expected. Midoriya. He attempted. The boy didn't indicate he'd heard him in the slightest. Shota grasped his wrists and gently pulled them away from his head. Midoriya. After several more shallow breaths, Midoriya looked up at him with wild eyes that held no recognition. Do you know who I am? He asked. Red. Was the response. Dark red. Slow red. Scary red. He let out a whine. White, I want white. Where's white? His breathing sped up and Shota gripped his wrists more tightly. Midoriya, I'm going to put your hand on my chest. Can you follow my breaths? He waited until the boy calmed down slightly and gave a jerky nod. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. He repeated it until Midoriya wasn't gulping down air and some kind of awareness returned to his expression. What was that? He asked when Midoriya mumbled something indistinguishable. I want purple. He murmured. Purple helps. Shota glanced at the other teen who had been watching anxiously from the side. He did look very purple. He gestured for the boy to sit down next to Midoriya. He immediately ripped his grip free from Shota and grabbed onto the other. The boy relaxed further as he continued to hold onto the purple boy and after a few more stressful minutes, fell asleep. Izuku didn't know how to feel. On one hand, he preferred rescue training to combat training. There was less of a chance of him screwing up and accidentally hurting people because he forgot it wasn't real. On the other hand, he had to sit on a bus with 19 other teenagers who didn't understand the concept of volume. Midoriya. Azui said, I always say what's on my mind. Why do people insist on talking to me? This is not good for my anxiety. He turned to face her, resisting the urge to groan as he was forced to form his comfortable position against the window. Yes. You're pretty brutal for such an unassuming guy, Karo. She said bluntly. Izuku blinked. What do you mean? When had he been brutal? She couldn't have seen him walking home with Shinso when they'd been attacked by that mugger, so what was she talking about? She gave him an odd look. You need my netta in the face. But, he shrugged. It was a training exercise. If he'd gotten up I would have done worse. I didn't want to use my quirk any more than necessary, so I just used my hand-to-hand combat. Why wouldn't you want to use your quirk? Kirishima exclaimed. It's so cool, not to mention pretty flashy. I'm kinda jealous. My hardening is useful but not really eye-grabbing. Izuku stared at him blankly. Why would I want to be flashy? That's terrible for stealth. Besides, hardening would be incredibly useful for a pro. You would have a lot less to worry about when it comes to injuries and your property damage would likely be lower than a lot of our classmates. My naval laser is the perfect combo of strong and flashy. Aoyama interjected. Yeah, but it SCKS that you can't use it for long without causing your stomach to collapse. Mina countered. That sounds painful. But if we want to talk really strong flashy quirks, it's gotta be Todoroki or Bakugo. Mina continued. Did she forget Tokoyami? And like half their classmates? There are some incredibly powerful quirks if used correctly. Azui considered. But Bakugo is always so angry, so he'll never be popular, ribbit. Izuku sat back, content to watch the shitshow that would no doubt ensue once Bakugo had been provoked. The blonde did not disappoint, and despite the screams that followed, he couldn't help but be thankful that the attention was now off of him. Great job, dipshit. It hasn't even been a month and people are getting suspicious. Would you like a medal with the words very conspicuous person? How about a sign that says I'm using forged documents? He suddenly sensed someone's light focusing on him with unsettling intensity. It was blisteringly hot and yet chillingly cold, and he knew that it was Todoroki. He must be glaring a hole in the back of his head if he was feeling it this much. What had he ever done to him? Oh yeah, he'd critiqued him at the battle trials. But that had happened to everyone else. Did he think he didn't deserve it? Izuku nestled back into his place against the window. It wasn't his problem anyway. Hello everyone. 13 exclaimed. I was waiting for you all. Izuku had seen a lot of lights in his life, and there were several he would stare at for days if he'd been allowed. 13th's light, however, was FANG weird. It was a light, and yet it was completely black and he could feel the pull of it. To allow you to train in conditions as real as possible, I designed this place to imitate many natural disasters. I named it Unforeseen Simulation Joint, USJ. Weird light or not, Izuku couldn't deny that the hero was cool, not to mention sweet. Aizawa was not. Where's All Might? He was supposed to meet us here. 13 waved Aizawa over and whispered into his ear, holding up 3 fingers. Well, that doesn't look sketchy at all. Their teacher scowled, turning back to face them when something inside Izuku hissed in warning. His quirk was strange as it was powerful, and despite the obvious advantages of being able to take quirks, one of his favorite things about it was the warning system. He could sense people's nearby by their quirk, whether they were hiding or not, and because he could feel them, he could often identify what type they were. And all of his instincts were screaming Warper. Aizawa-sensei, there was something coming, something wrong. People began coming out of a large purple portal, led by a man with pale blue hair who was covered in hands. The fountain sputtered as more and more people streamed out, many wearing maniacal grins. Has the training started already? Kirishima asked, starting to walk to see what was going on. There's no countdown and all that. Don't move. Aizawa orders. Those are villains. There was a press break-in. Shinso had explained. That's why we had the evacuation. One of them used their quirk to disintegrate the gate. Izuku had thought that seemed like an awful lot of effort for an interview. Clearly thinking along the same lines, 13 let out a gasp. They're the ones responsible for the break-in yesterday, they exclaimed. The hand-covered leader surveyed them. Where is he? He asked. Don't tell me we came all this way for the symbol of peace to be absent. His head tilted and Izuku had the feeling whatever he said next would not be pleasant. Will he come if we kill the kids? I hate being right. Izuku heard someone let out a whimper as the tension continued to rise. Most of the kids here had never had someone try to kill them, had never had to fight just to stay alive, and it showed. 13, take care of them, Aizawa instructed, slipping on his yellow goggles. Kaminari, try to contact the school. Is he suicidal? There's no way he can take that many villains. Especially that weird hulking one in the back. He resisted the urge to throw up. That villain felt wrong. I can't contact anyone, Kaminari said, voice shaking slightly. They cut us off. Regardless, the man leapt into the fray, taking down small fry villains left and right. Unfortunately, that left them with the warper. Greetings, the purple mist announced. You need not forgive our audacity, for today we have come to put an end to the symbol of peace. Well, that'll probably be pretty difficult. It took Izuku a second to realize he had spoken aloud. He's not here, and with communications cut there's no way for him to know we're in trouble. Everyone was staring at him, so he figured that this was as good of time to stall as any. You'd have to let someone go for the school to be aware and for them to alert All Might. Izuku could see the cogs turning in the purple mist's eyes, and for a second he thought it might work. Then of course, like Raging Buffalo, Bakugo and Kirishima launched themselves at the villain, hands sparking or hardened. Die! Yelled Bakugo. That dumb motherfucker. The warper dodged and they were all enveloped in his mists. Fumikage Tokoyami stood back to back with Koda, dark shadow lashing out at any villain brave enough to approach. The artificial darkened sky was more than enough to strengthen his soul twin, and while their opponents were numerous, it appeared that they were not well versed in the art of combat. There was no animals nearby in their rainy prison, so Koda was not able to utilize his quirk. Thankfully, his comrade's large size seemed to be enough of a deterrent despite his lack of ferocity. Fumikage struggled to keep his dark partner in check as another villain lunged. May this darkness soon be lifted, he prayed. Kyuka clutched the sword Yaoyorozu had given her tightly. They were surrounded on all sides and Kaminari was practically useless. He couldn't discharge without hurting them as well. The mountainous terrain provided many places to hide, so they couldn't be sure there weren't more people waiting to ambush. She slashed at a villain who got too close and smiled in grim satisfaction as he retreated with a pained grunt. Get down! Yaoyorozu yelled. Kyuka didn't question it, immediately dropping to the ground. Several long poles shot out of Yaoyorozu's stomach and sent numerous villains flying down the mountain. It also happened to rip her classmate's costume. Control yourself, you useless gay. Kyuka made a point not to stare. Now is not the time. Die, die, die. It wasn't even funny how Bakugo tore through villains like tissue paper, brutally sending them flying with well-aimed explosions. So manly. If he'd had the time, Aijuru would have wiped a tear from his eye. Mashireo Ojiro was sweating buckets. There was fire everywhere and having to run away from large groups of villains didn't help. Luckily, they weren't actually hard to beat, so his hit-and-run tactics were lowering their numbers slowly. I'm taking an ice bath when I get out of this, he thought, purposely ignoring the voice in his head that wanted to say You're pretty pathetic. Shudo sneered, unimpressed as the villains struggled to get out of his ice. You're adults and you can't even handle one teenager. Is he really a kid? So powerful. I'm gonna kill you. He watched them impassively. You know it only takes a few minutes before your circulation cuts off. Shudo walked closer to one of the cowering adults. Want to tell me what your plan is? Hantashiro was trying very hard not to look at 13's still body. He knew that if he did, this whole situation would become way too real and he might throw up. This wasn't supposed to happen, they weren't supposed to have to fight for their lives in the first month of school. Hanta wasn't ready for this. None of them were. They were at oldest 16 for God's sake. We need someone to contact the school. Uraraka said suddenly, not taking her eyes off of the misty villain. Ida, you're the fastest, so you should go. The teen in question looked shocked. I can't simply leave the rest of you here. Shoji glanced at them using one of the eyes on his arms. This will only get worse without help. It took a while to convince Ida, but when they finally did, he went full throttle for the doors. The warper started making portals and they launched their attack. Please, thought Hanta as he wrapped the villain with his tape. I don't want to die. The air was punched out of Izuku's lungs as he hit the water with the grace of a toddler. It took him a moment to register anything but pain as he struggled to gain his bearings. Water. His brain supplied helpfully. What snapped him out of his dazed state was someone trying to kill him again. He sensed a quirk coming hurtling towards him and snapped open his eyes, trying to see in the dark and murky water. Just as he was about to launch himself off of the villain and upwards towards the air he desperately needed, he sensed Azui's quirk approaching and let her wrap her tongue around him. She pulled both him and Mineta out of the water and onto a sinking ship, retracting her tongue back into her mouth. Thanks, Azui, Izuku said, gasping in air. They knew we'd be here. She gave him a nod. No problem, and call me Tsu. A loud wail came from her other side. We're gonna die. Mineta whimpered. He spared one look at him before turning back to Asu. They might have known the layout of the building, but they clearly don't know our quirks. He gestured to her. You have the advantage here. If they had sent Sato or Kirishima here, they would be practically useless. Not to mention they're holding off on attacking right now. They're wary, we can use that. Even if we escape from here, there'll be more villains waiting. We don't even know when or if the pros will arrive. We're doomed. Tsu pursed her lips. They're here to kill All Might, so we have to assume they have a plan for that, and that the pros might not be able to help even when they do arrive. Mineta let out another whine and Izuku resisted the urge to kick him. We don't have much of a choice. He informed them. This ship is sinking and Tsu is the only one out of us who would have a chance making it out. He could always steal a few quirks and survive that way, but they didn't know that. She regarded him. Do you have a plan? Izuku nodded. Then spill. Shota was wearing down and he knew it. There were too many to fight, even without the mutations thrown in the mix. He wasn't suited to group battles, but his preferred style of one-on-one ambushes wouldn't work here, so he was stuck. There were a lot of small fry lingering around, and those weren't his concern. What he was worried about was the two villains that hadn't moved since he'd begun in attack. The pale shaggy one and the enormous black-skinned one with an exposed brain. The latter hadn't so much as twitched the entire time, like they couldn't even think for themselves. You're slowing down, Eraserhead. The shaggy man cackled, moving in to attack him. Shota kept his quirk trained on him. He didn't know what he was capable of, and quite frankly he didn't want to find out. Your hair drops when you stop using your quirk. When you're moving around it makes it hard to tell, but you've been doing that more often. He elbowed the man in his stomach and he caught it. 17 seconds. He had to blink and pain erupted from his elbow the moment he did, his hero costume and skin crumbling away under the other's hand. Shota reactivated his quirk and glared, punching the man before backing away and having to deal with more small fry, this time with an injury. You aren't suited to this, but you jumped right in anyway. You're a cool guy, aren't you? Unfortunately for you, I'm not the final boss. Will this fucker ever stop monologuing? Nomu, get him. One moment the large black creature was standing by the fountain, the next, right behind Shota, arm already mid-strike. Any sense of accomplishment from defeating the villains in the shipwreck zone was immediately squashed as Tsuyu saw her teacher's arm shatter like a twig. Mineta let out a whimper as he sunk himself deeper into the water. Aizawa screamed and activated his quirk on the thing holding him captive because there was no way that was a man, and it crushed his other arm and slammed his head onto the ground. She felt sick. Tamura Shigaraki, the warp villain who had scattered them all, appeared next to the leader, who was laughing like a madman. Kurojairi, he said with a nod. Is 13 dead? Please don't be dead. They have been neutralized. Kurojairi responded, and Tsuyu felt an intense wave of relief. Unfortunately, one of the hirelings managed to escape. The pros shouldn't be far behind. Shigaraki growled menacingly. If I didn't need your quirk, I would kill you, Kurogyri. He began scratching his neck, mumbling low enough that she couldn't hear him anymore. We're leaving, Shigaraki announced. You hear that? Mineta said, face beginning to glow. He was hopeful that this was the end. She was too, but all her instincts were screaming otherwise. She was proved correct when the villain turned to them. Since we can't kill All Might today, some dead kids will have to do to wound his pride. He lunged, impossibly fast, and Tsuyu wouldn't be able to move fast enough. She was going to die. She was going to die. And suddenly Shigaraki was flying back. Midoriya stood with his hand extended, his hero costume dripping wet as he stared the villains down. And then he did something that Tsuyu would never forget, something that would haunt her nightmares, because for a split second she couldn't decide who she was more frightened of. Midoriya smiled. Tamura pushed himself to his feet as he glared at the heroling who had dared to attack him, only to find something peculiar. Something interesting. The boy who had sent him flying was short and had clearly been in the nearby shipwreck zone. His costume was dark and ripped at the side, and he could vaguely make out that it had been green. His curly hair stuck to his face and freckles dotted his figure as he rose from his crouch. That wasn't what interested him, however. No, that would be the boy's smile. It showed every one of his teeth and had a cruel edge to it. Now that on its own would have been enough to pique his interest, but what made this so sweet was the look in his eyes. They were utterly cold. No fear, no hesitation, not even an ounce of regret or pain. Just an ice so intense Tamura could feel it from where he stood. The boy didn't speak, choosing instead to walk towards them plaza. He didn't even spare a glance to his injured teacher. He felt giddy. Oh, what do we have here? Tamura let his own manic grin slip. You aren't like those other heralings, are you? No, you're something much worse. Something akin to amusement tainted those cold eyes. You have no idea. Now this was what Tamura wanted. Someone just as unapologetic about the monster that thrived within them. You could have broken my neck with that blow, he said, testing the waters. The grin sharpened. If only I was so lucky. I like you. Tamura cackled. Enough to leave? Annoyance quickly replaced his amusement. No, we're not leaving until we've broken the symbol of peace's pride. The boy looked around. He's still not here. We shouldn't waste our time. Kurogyri interrupted. The heroes will be here soon. Shut up, he snapped. I'm going to kill these kids. Stay out of this, Kurogyri. Tamura turned to the Nomu, a grin on his face. Grab him. It obeyed. It was only thanks to several quirks that Izuku survived. When that Nomu thing lunged at him, it had taken all his speed and reaction quirks to just barely dodge a fatal hit. Even the glancing blow that had connected hurt like a beach. He wasn't so lucky the second time when it continued its assault and claimed both hands around his torso and trapped his arms down, squeezing hard enough that he saw black spots. The only thing that kept him conscious was the feeling or wrongness that emanated from the beast. He now recognized why it bothered him so much. It had several quirks stuffed into one body that couldn't handle that many. Izuku's arms were useless, but unlike his father who had needed physical contact to take quirks, his was a mix of his mother's and father's, making it so that he could take them without touch as long as he was within 10 feet. The Nomu definitely qualified. He fought through his nausea as he began pulling one of the quirks towards him. It was tangled with the others and was a tenuous process, but eventually he was able to identify it as shock absorption. See that power? The madman asked. It was made to defeat All Might, so it can definitely handle a brat like you. Izuku began pulling another. It was easier this time, and he could tell much sooner that it was a speed quirk. Another for the collection. He thought grimly. Crush him, Nomu. Yeah, time to not be here. Ignoring the pain in his ribs, he raised his legs and kicked the Nomu in the face and propelled himself away. He hit the ground hard but managed to turn it into a roll and get to his feet. You're a real Bisidi, you know that? Izuku wiped the blood off his mouth. He glanced at Aizawa's bloody body and resisted the urge to sigh in relief when he saw the man's light still glowing strongly. He was in no danger of dying. A large explosion went off behind him and Bakugu was launched towards Kurogyri. He was able to get the jump on the villain, on account of Kurogiri's focus on Shigaraki's fight. Kirishima came charging in to support him, but it wasn't actually necessary. You move 1 inch and I'll blow you to kingdom come. Bakugo screamed. I knew you had a effing body in there somewhere. Kirishima let out a nervous laugh as he stood protectively in front of Bakugo, probably realizing that while holding Kurogiri hostage he wouldn't be able to defend himself. Shigaraki looked enraged and confused. How did you dash? He let out a frustrated scream and lunged for Izuku. He pulled one of the many knives on his person out of a pocket and spun on his heel, letting Shigaraki go past him as he left a long cut along his outstretched arm. You worm! The villain screeched, turning around to come swiping at him again. The cut didn't seem to be slowing him down as he began the deadliest game of tag he'd ever played. Shigaraki's quirk was no doubt powerful and dangerous, but it only seemed to work when all 5 fingers were touching something like Uraraka's. That made his hands very deadly weapons, but it also meant he didn't rely on his legs as much. He dropped low and kicked the side of Shigaraki's knee, activating his only 2 strength quirks. A pained scream echoed through the plaza. Toshinori had expected a lot of things when he burst through the doors of the USJ, iconic smile not longer on his face, but this was not one of them. Young Bakugo was kneeling above a man who seemed to be made of mist while young Kirishima guarded him. Aizawa was covered in blood and Toshinori very much hoped he was only unconscious. Young Midoriya was holding a knife over a pale man's neck, expression as cold and merciless as the Arctic. Still he bellowed, "Have no fear, for I am here." The pale man's face twisted and he shouted, "Nomo! Free Kurogiri!" Idru was shaking. 1 second he was standing in front of Bakugo in an attempt to defend him so that he wouldn't have to let go of the villain, the next that big black thing that had attacked Midoriya was flying towards him. It happened so fast he knew there was nothing he would be able to do to stop it. In the face of overwhelming power, he was helpless. Luckily, their side had overwhelming power too. All Might planted himself in front of them, locking the creature in combat, the two now straining against each other. He heard Bakugo swear behind him and turned to see the mist villain free. He must have loosened his hold during the Nomu's attack, allowing the other a chance to escape. "You need to get out of here." All Might called out to them. "I have this handled." Except he clearly didn't. While All Might was just the slightest bit faster than his opponent, they were of equal strength, and every time they connected a shockwave ripped through the plaza. The freed warper opened a portal right under Midoriya, forcing him to release the hand dude or be Esiki into it. Midoriya darted away on light feet, his chillingly cold expression remaining. He held his knife in a defensive position and moved to avoid the ice Todoroki. Where had he come from? Sent the villain's way without even looking. Kirishima. Idru jumped at being addressed. "We need to get Aizawa-sensei away from All Might's fight." Midoriya nodded towards the collateral damage the two were taking. "All right." While he carefully made his way over to his hopefully only unconscious teacher, he could hear the hand dude shrieking as All Might and the Nomu clashed again and again. Nomu was made specifically to fight you, All Might. It has shock absorption, strength, and regeneration. This will be your downfall. The symbol of peace will die here. Shock absorption? That means there's a limit to how much it can take. All Might boomed. He reeled his arm back for a devastating punch, only for it to be caught by the warper and redirected at Todoroki and Midoriya. The former created an enormous ice wall that was immediately blown apart but had done its job even if the two had been toppled over. Not content with only one arm, the purple mist dude then completely separated All Might in 3 pieces, head, legs and torso, preventing the man from moving without risking being cut into pieces. "Destroy him! Rip him in half!" crowed the hand dude, still in the same place he'd been when Midoriya had bent his knee the wrong way. Idru grabbed under Aizawa's armpits and began dragging him away as gently as he could. The Nomu kicked up a cloud of dust and was suddenly there, already poised to crush All Might's torso. He froze in place, shocked because he hadn't even seen it move, and as was going to kill All Might and there was nothing he could do. A dark figure appeared above the Nomu. Faster than his brain was able to comprehend, Midoriya wrapped his legs around its neck and drove the pair of knives he'd produced into the Nomu's exposed brain. An inhuman screech rang through the plaza. Midoriya wasn't finished though, and continued slicing until the two blades met in the center of the creature's back. He jumped off of it. Ijiru's heart was beating 1,000,000 miles an hour, but despite the gruesome scene, he was glad that thing was dealt with. That was until it started healing. You have got to be kidding me. Izuku watched as the Nomu stitched itself back together. The deep slashes he'd inflicted soon made little more than a paper cut before that too was gone. He'd fought people with regeneration before, and the trick was usually to either knock them out or force them to heal so many times that they became tired. Something told him it wouldn't be that easy. Seriously though, of the quirks I managed to nab, I couldn't have gotten regeneration? Regardless, his attack had managed to distract Kurogiri long enough that Todoroki was able to force him to dodge with a wave of ice, freeing All Might in the process. The hero immediately went to work on the Nomu, punching at speeds that Izuku didn't even bother trying to follow. No, he was more concerned with the fact that Shigaraki was slowly but surely crawling towards a prone Aizawa and a distracted Kirishima. He had hoped that Bakugo would intervene, but some of the small fry villains had gotten up again and were attacking him en masse, preventing any aid he might have provided. Izuku was too far away to stop him, and he didn't trust minor pull and float enough to risk it. He did his best to hide that he was much better at pushing things outward with force push than he was at pulling things to himself on account of the baseline strength of both quirks. So instead of trying to stop Shigaraki away, he pulled. The villain's hand wrapped around Aizawa's ankle. Izuku activated erasure seconds before throwing Shigaraki away and barking at a surprised Kirishima to get him out of here and pay more attention, before kicking Shigaraki in the ribs. Go beyond, plus ultra. The Nomu flew through the roof of the Uday as the symbol of peace stood confidently before the remaining villains. Come get me, he shouted, but Izuku saw something curious. All Might was shaking. Not only that, but his light was wavering between its regular overwhelming intensity and the power of a single match. Before any of the villains could take him up on that, the entrance doors burst open, revealing the teachers of UA in all their glory, Snipe immediately shooting several bullets, one of which hit Shigaraki. Izuku made the mistake of looking away for a fraction of a second. Burning pain erupted from his calf as it disintegrated, his instincts pushing him to kick Shigaraki in the head to get him to stop. Lies. All Might hasn't weakened at all, he shrieked before Izuku kicked him once again. He fell backwards and away from the prone form of the villain as Kurogiri created a portal just beneath him before disappearing himself. Izuku was vaguely aware of Kirishima rushing over to him and the rest of the heroes picking off the small fry villains, but he was pretty far gone. He'd been injured many times before, but never quite like this, and it hurt more than he was expecting. His pounding headache from quirk overuse didn't help. One of the few drawbacks aside from having to be on the run for the majority of his life that his quirk had was the massive headaches he got. They never came when he was using them, but the second he stopped it would come all at once and was a pain. Literally. He sensed All Might's light settling down to that soft candlelight and tried to turn around only for his stomach to roll violently as his head flared. That's not a good idea. Are you okay, Midoriya? He heard Kirishima ask, kneeling down next to him. Izuku blinked owlishly. I think I'm gonna pass out. And he did. Kigo Takami Hawks perched on top of a building, letting the cool air ruffle through his wings as his sharp eyes darted around the city. Normally he would be on the ground, talking with civilians and keeping up the persona the Hero Safety Commission demanded he wear, but today he needed to get away from all the bustle and flashing cameras. Hawks considered himself a talented actor, but even he had his limits when it came to holding that fake smile for so long. It wasn't like he was missing much, his feathers were as spread out as they always were, taking in enough information to overwhelm a lesser man. Hawks had long ago learned what to dismiss and what to pay attention to, and at the moment everything was peaceful. Too peaceful. There had been a decrease in crime recently, and while someone more optimistic would take it as a sign that the presence of heroes was helping the decline, Hawks knew better. After all, hope was a luxury only fools could afford. The world came to Izuku in pieces. First was his quirk, immediately reaching out to sense anyone nearby, coming up with only a few mild lights that weren't close enough to be a threat. There was a quiet hum reverberating around the room, and when he finally mustered enough strength to open his eyes, he was met with a plain white ceiling. He winced at the bright light above him before sluggishly pushing himself into a sitting position. Izuku felt like his head was full of cotton, the drags he knew were in his system making it hard to move. Focus. Whoever had captured him had decided to deal and bandage his leg and had apparently opted against any form restraints. Either they were particularly stupid or were trying to be kind so they could coerce him into cooperating. Their mistake. They had replaced his hero costume with sweatpants and a loose t-shirt, so that meant he didn't have any of his gear. It didn't matter, he was used to fighting barehanded. Izuku pulled the covers off of himself and stood, blood rushing to his head as the world tilted. He gripped the bed frame and staggered over to a small sink with a mirror above it. He wasn't interested in how he looked, he was well aware it was probably like sheet. What he wanted was the shards. Well, the soon-to-be shards. Forcing himself to activate a strength quirk along with his newly acquired durability to avoid further injury, he rapped the mirror forcefully, causing it to shatter. He cringed at the noise but relaxed slightly when no one came running. If they had cameras monitoring him, someone would have likely already come to check on him. As he was picking up a few of the larger pieces, he sensed someone getting closer and silently hid behind the door. It opened and a short woman with bright blue hair stepped inside. Her light wasn't alert or aggressive, and she was probably some form of medic by the look of her uniform. Not a fighter. That was why it was easy, even in his drugged stupor, to slip behind her and put her in a choke hold long enough for her to pass out. Less easy was dragging her into the closet and cutting the bedsheets into bindings, but you work with what you've got. Weapon in hand, he pushed open the door and began staggering his way down the hallway. He had to pause every few steps or he would pass out, so it was slow going. 15 feet to the window. Several lights were rapidly approaching from the stairwell. There weren't any doors close enough to duck into. 12 feet. 2 lights coming from behind him. 10 feet. They were in sight now, 2 men and a woman coming from his right and 2 men from behind. 5 feet. He tried to activate any of his quirks, but the drags in his system only allowed his to faintly grasp them, and his nausea increased with his efforts. 2 feet. The woman was saying something, her brow furrowed as the dark-haired man stepped forward. The yellow man's light and the woman's felt familiar for some reason, but it didn't matter. He needed to get out. One of the 2 men from behind grasped his shoulder and instinct took over from there. Izuku rammed his elbow into the man's nose before quickly throwing him over his shoulder and onto the ground. He threw the glass shard at the dark-haired man who'd stepped forward before turning to the window. 0 feet. His palm struck the window and he forced himself to activate fracture and both of his strength quirks. The glass cracked heavily but didn't break. He wound up for another hit but ultimately was forced away. The woman was emitting some sort of purple gas, and he did not want to find out what it did. The world was becoming blurrier with every passing moment, but he couldn't stop now, couldn't die here, couldn't be captured again, and he would bring this building down before he was. He threw his other glass shard at the woman, using as much of force push as he could in his condition. The world went black before he found out if his aim had been true. Nemuri stared at Midoriya's unconscious body, his relaxed expression a sharp contrast to the near-feral-like snarl it had previously donned. There had been no recognition nor hesitation in his movements, and she knew he'd been aiming to maim. A stream of swears brought her attention to Tensei. Motherfucker! He cursed. He had been the one to intercept the glass shards Midoriya had sent flying at the 2 of them with a well-timed deflection, but had still gotten cut in the process. What the hell was that? Hizashi pulled the injured doctor to his feet, the man clutching his probably broken nose. If I had to guess, I'd say he wanted to leave. No sheet. Nemuri sniped. The uninjured doctor cleared his throat. If I may offer some insight, Hizashi gestured for him to continue. As you are aware, this hospital specializes in injuries for heroes and other law enforcement branches. It's not unusual for some of them to be jumpy, so to speak, after waking up. I believe he was one of the students from the USJ attack, correct? Nemuri nodded. Well, then it is possible that under the influence of the painkillers and sedatives he panicked and still thought he was with the villains. He glanced at the Midoriya's prone form and winced. Speaking of which, would you mind helping me get him back to his room? I've already alerted some of the other staff, but the sooner we hook him back on the floor the better. Hizashi bent down and scooped the limp body into his arms, following the doctor into one of the side rooms without another word as the doctor with the broken nose murmured quietly into a walkie-talkie. He guided them into a side room as a nurse appeared and began tending to Tensei's cuts. He in any of your classes? Tensei asked. Nemuri nodded. His name is Izuku Midoriya. Never causes any trouble and keeps to himself for the most part. Pretty sure he's bored out of his mind half the time in class though. Tensei stared at her in disbelief. With Yue's workload? The kid's smart, what can I say? They thanked the doctor and began making their way towards Aizawa's room. What I'm more concerned about is the way he reacted. While it's true that he might have just been confused, that's a very extreme reaction for a kid. That does seem concerning. I can't imagine Tenya acting like that, and he was in the same attack. Nemuri recalled the icy determination in Midoriya's acidic green eyes. We'll keep an eye on him. It was hours after Nemuri and Tensei had left, the former needed for a press conference about this shitshow. Normally Hizashi would join her, but Nizu had taken one look at the blonde and released him from his duties until Shoto woke up. Which he still hadn't. This was far from the first time one of them had been injured. It came with the territory of being a pro-hero after all, but it never got any easier. What little skin could be seen on Shoto was deathly pale, his husband's chest raising and falling far too slowly for comfort. He needed a break. Quietly shutting the hospital room door, Hizashi made his way to the vending machine. Considering this was a hospital exclusively for law enforcement members, it was filled with things ranging from protein bars to energy drinks to gummy bears. Collecting his chocolate bar, he nearly stumbles when he sees a purple-haired teen curled up behind the machine. His arms were tightly clutching his legs to his chest, and there was a definite note of anxiety in the boy's eyes. Probably visiting someone. Hizashi deducted, but it didn't explain why he looked 5 seconds from a panic attack. Hey, little listener. The purple teen jolted violently. Are you all right? Wary eyes followed his movements closely. They're not letting me see my friend. He said eventually. They said he's too dangerous for visitors. Who's your friend? There was probably more than one person submitted to the hospital that had had a negative reaction recently. Izuku Midoriya. Or not. He was caught up in the USJ attack and he was injured badly enough that he's been here for 2 days and they won't let me see him. There was a slight snarl to his words and his already pale skin was further whitened as his fingers pressed against each other. Hizashi crouched down next to him, keeping his movements predictable and slow. I might be able to help you. The boy narrowed his eyes. You're not a doctor. It wasn't a question. No, he agreed. But if they're labeling your friend dangerous Violet eyes hardened. Need to tread carefully now. Then if I'm there to supervise, then they might let you visit. Why would they? Hizashi released a blinding grin. Who could say no to this face? He was met with a bland stare. Tough crowd. Hizashi muttered. Come on kid, let's go find a doctor. The lanky teen slowly got to his feet, his tall frame stretching out like a cat. It reminded him painfully of Shota, the kid's eyebags not helping the similarities. He might as well have been a younger purple version of him with those observant eyes flickering around, wary in a way no kid his age should be. Getting permission was easier than Hizashi thought it would be. They still had Midoriya under sedation. Apparently the second time he'd been awoken hadn't gone much better, so with a pro-hero watching the unconscious boy the hospital allowed it. The purple teen, which he now knew as Shinso, had been borderline harassing the staff to let him in, and when he had been refused, had resigned himself to stalking the hallways. How do you know Midoriya? Hizashi asked in an attempt to make conversation. They were nearly to the aforementioned boy's room at this point, and Shinso hadn't said anything since introducing himself. Hitoshi's shoulders stiffened slightly. We live close and go to the same school. Hizashi brightened. You got to UA as well? Yeah. What class? He inquired. Shinsu's expression shut down. 1C, He practically spat. I'm in general studies. Probably tried to get into the hero course. It's nice to have someone you know at a new school. Were you guys childhood friends? Hisashi resisted the urge to grin as Hitoshi relaxed minutely. Nah, we met only recently. He only moved in a little while ago. They reached Midoriya's room and Hisashi paused before opening it. Are you ready? Hitoshi took a deep breath. The doctors told me that he had never been in danger of dying, and that he'll make a full recovery. But you're frightened that if you open that door it won't be true. Hisashi understood on a painful level. Shinso visibly steeled himself. He survived a villain attack. I can open a door. He still didn't move. It's not a competition. Hisashi said gently. Hitoshi released a shuddering breath as his hand shot out like a viper and quickly turned the knob before gently pushing the door. The room is one reserved for dangerous patients, and it showed. There wasn't a window or anything that could be easily broken or turned into a weapon. The hospital bed was built to accommodate the restraints that were locked around Midoriya's wrists and ankles, and even the 4 in his arm was sturdily built. Shinso slowly made his way towards that bed, hands shaking lightly as watched the unconscious boy. Hisashi remained at the entrance, unwilling to break the moment. Alive. Hitoshi released a shaky breath. Alive. He reached towards Midoriya before snatching his hand back and glancing at him sheepishly. Hisashi restrained a grin. Puppy love was so cute. Do you know how long it'll be until he's discharged? Shinso shook his head. They wouldn't tell me. The only reason they even let me in was because of my UA student card. I'm sure he'll be up and at M in no time. Hisashi reassured him, glancing at the aforementioned boy, and found 2 acidic green eyes staring back. There were people in his cell. They had clearly learned from his first escape attempt, and had moved him to a much more fortified room. The drags were still messing with his head and his arms and legs were restrained, leaving him options for escape. Oh, thank God. The purple-haired boy practically deflated with relief. He was lean and his stance showed a lack of preparedness and training. Hopefully it wasn't an act. Why do their lights seem familiar? The blond man felt much more dangerous. Though he smiled brightly asking, "How ya feeling, little listener?" Every instinct in Izuku's body screamed that he was a threat. His light was a bright yellow that ebbed and flowed like a wave, inconspicuous one moment but overwhelming the next. His posture was casual, but the type of casual those with enough power gained after enough battles won, enough blood shed, and enough pain endured. He'd be the one to watch. Something was nagging him in the back of his mind. Why didn't he feel under threat? Why was he so relaxed? Why did he feel like he knew them? I can't believe you, the boy said with a tone somewhere between worried and exasperated. You just had to get caught up in a villain attack. When had he been in a villain attack? Weren't they villains? Were they attempting some sort of reverse psychology on him? Remember. Are you okay? I haven't been okay for years. The blonde came closer. Izuku met his gaze and began to pull. Remember. The man's light was heavy in the way powerful quirks were. His muddled brain could make out that it had to do with sound, but not much else. He was so focused on the blonde that he didn't realize the purple teen had bent over to hug him. I'm so glad you're alive. Remember. Tinto? Naomasa Tsukachi needed a coffee. His sister would disagree because it would be his 5th one, but after interviewing several dozen villains and traumatized teenagers, he figured he deserved it. He even talked to Aizawa, and that man had only just woken up from a medically induced coma. Thankfully for his sanity or what was left of it, he only had one person left, and he was both dreading and looking forward to it. He'd been subjected to many interesting stories about the boy, from villains and hero students alike, but he was a detective, and it was his job to be impartial. So Naomasa ignored the memories of frightful criminals and weary teenagers, and stepped into the hospital room. Izuku Midoriya was not what he expected. Lean, with a smattering of freckles and a face young enough to pass as much younger than he was, the teen was plain enough that most people wouldn't give him a second look. Naomasa knew he was throwing stones in a glass house on that front, but it didn't make it any less true. "Are you Izuku Midoriya?" he asked, more of a formality than anything. The teen quirked a tired smile. "That's me. But only years on the police force and hours upon hours or interrogations prevented Naomasa from reacting. So close to peace," he lamented. Naomasa gave a practiced smile. "I'm Detective Naomasa Tsukachi, and I'm here to talk to you about the USJ attack." "I figured." Naomasa took out his pen and notepad. "Let's start at the beginning, shall we?" For someone who was apparently lying about his name, Midoriya was a very honest witness. Everything he said lined up with the other witnesses, to the point where Naomasa was beginning to wonder if he'd imagined his quirk going off. But no, helpful as the Midoriya speculations about Shigaraki were, it wasn't long after he described his engagement with the Nomu did he lie once more. "He said it had multiple quirks," Midoriya said, a faintly disturbed look momentarily crossing his expression. "That's why it was able to go toe-to-toe with All Might for so long. He was pretty convinced that All Might was supposed to be weakened as well." Naomasa fought off a sigh. His idiotic friend was not doing himself any favors with his reckless behavior. Tashinori could have easily grabbed a few of UA's teachers instead of rushing off by himself, but no, the oaf had gone alone and shortened his hero time even further. While All Might was fighting it, Shigaraki crawled over to Aizawa-sensei and Kirishima to try to finish the job? A sharp exhale. Anyway, he didn't manage to disintegrate him any more than he already had. "Do you know why? You said he had a 5-point activation quirk, correct? Knowing if it activated on will or with anything he touched would be essential knowledge if the man was captured." "No idea. But..." Naomasa refused to stutter in his writing. "I got distracted by the rest of the teachers arriving and Shigaraki grabbed my calf." A half-hearted gesture to his leg. "And then I passed out." According to Cementos, he'd been very close to Tashinori right before he'd reverted to his skinny form. Better safe than sorry. "Did you notice anything else before that?" "Nope. But this was going to be a mess." Naomasa smiled blandly. "Just a few more routine questions for those involved in incidents like these. Please don't get offended." They weren't, but with Midoriya lying about who he was and several other things, they were more than justified. Intelligent green eyes watched him closely. "Shoot. Were you aware of the attack before it happened?" "I had a bad feeling right before they showed up, but nothing other than that." "Have you ever broken any laws?" "Yup." Naomasa froze, unsure how to proceed in the face of just blatant honesty when, "I've definitely jaywalked before." The detective let out a laugh he didn't feel. "Were you in any way involved with the villains?" "Nope." "Are any of your family members villains?" "Not as far as I know." "Were you a target of the villains?" Midoriya shrugged. "They were only after All Might, the rest of us were collateral damage." A slight chill makes its way down Naomasa's back at the callous way he talked about his own life as well as those of his classmates. "Though I might have made myself into one." "Can you expand on that?" A humorless smile made its way onto Midoriya's face. "After I knocked him back from Tsu, he said I was interesting. Considering he's a glorified man-child, I may have made myself into his next favorite play toy." "Do you know why?" Something akin to dark amusement flitted through his intense green eyes. "He said he liked my smile." That was a can of worms he did not want to get into. "Last question." He said instead of going to the nearest bar and drowning himself in whiskey like he wanted to. "Have you lied at all during this meeting? Deceiving law enforcement is a serious crime." The expression on Midoriya's face was so genuine it sent a shiver down his spine. "Of course not." He lied. "I'm a perfectly normal law-abiding citizen." There hadn't been even the slightest indication of unease or hesitation in Midoriya's answers, nothing that hinted at a lie or falsehood in his posture or tone. If it hadn't been for his quirk, Naomasa would have had absolutely no idea he had just lied to his face. That spoke of someone who did so often, and who had done so in tense enough situations that he could do it to a cop in the middle of an interview. At the very least, he didn't seem to have anything to do with the USJ attack, so that was one more dead end. As bad as it sounded, If Midoriya had been a spy, then he'd probably be able to lead them to Shigaraki and make this whole situation a lot easier for them. Instead, they had a suspicious teen with seemingly no connections and a villain group with no leads. Scratch the coffee, Naomasa was getting scotch. Izuku didn't know how, but he had f'd up. The detective was good at masking his emotions and tells, but reading people had been the difference between survival and death for too long for him to not realize. Tsukachi had been pleasant, but as the interview went on, he had become more and more tense, and his eyes had sharpened. Izuku didn't know what it was, but something he had said had made him suspicious. And people who were under suspicion had a tendency to end up dead. He considered making a break for it, leaving now and laying low until something bigger came along and took precedence, but that would just confirm that he was not what he appeared to be. His papers would be scrutinized and found to be forged, and if they were smart with Nedzu as your principal, it was practically a guarantee. They would be able to trace him from his most recent place in America. His mother's body strewed on the concrete, motionless and cold. That would raise more questions and make more people aware of it, making the possibility of spies reporting to them bigger, and then he'd really be on the run. Being on the run had been his default mode for the majority of his life, and even though it had only been a few months, he simultaneously wanted to stay in one place too long and you end up dead and stay. Stay with those tentative routes he had established and risk capture, risk exposure. It was then that Izuku remembered. Oh if dash. Fuck. His exposure and capture became a lot more imminent if he didn't return Aizawa's quirk. Holy shit, he forgot he still had it. He was 97% sure Kirishima didn't see him using it when he saved Aizawa. If he had, he was pretty sure the detective would have asked many more uncomfortable questions, but he had completely forgotten to give it back. Yes, he had passed out, but Aizawa probably thought he was never going to get his quirk back. He needed to fix this, preferably right now. Ignoring the pain in his calf, Izuku pushed himself to his feet. After he had come to his senses, they had foregone the restraints and he was mostly left unattended unless he pressed the button on the monitor, which would bring a nurse to him. He couldn't sense Aizawa by his quirk now, but Present Mike had been in the hospital numerous times and didn't take a genius to figure out why. Only he and Aizawa had been injured, so if he estimated where he'd been spending most of his time. Izuku stood in front a closed door, hand hovering over the knob. Please be asleep, please be asleep, please be asleep, please. Two dark eyes darted towards him as he stepped into the room. Hi, Aizawa-sensei. His smile was more of a grimace. Aizawa looked like sheet. One side of his face was heavily bandaged and he had an arm in a cast. It was hard not to replay the scene of Aizawa's broken body in his mind, but he did his best. Midoriya. He sounded even more exhausted than usual. Aren't you supposed to be resting? Izuku let the door close behind him, thankful that Present Mike wasn't here. That would make things a lot more complicated. Unlike when he took a quirk, which he could do from a short distance, giving one back required skin contact. Thankfully, when he was giving a quirk back to its original holder, it was a smooth process and didn't take nearly as long as taking it or giving someone a quirk that wasn't theirs. Probably, he said with a shrug. I just wanted to see you. They told me you were fine, but Izuku cut himself off. Yeah. If he wasn't hyper-aware of everything going on around him, he would have missed the slight softening of Aizawa's expression. How's the leg? He winced slightly. Manageable. They can't heal it completely because of Shigaraki's quirk, so they're leaving it for now. I'll have a brace for about a week and have to have a checkup in 2, but other than that it's fine. Aizawa nodded, going to pick up his coffee. Here's my chance. Carefully activating minor pull and air lift, he very gently pushed the cup just enough to cause it to tumble to the ground without RSNG suspicion. Hopefully. China shattered and hot coffee spilled everywhere. Oh. Izuku purposely jumped at the noise. Here, I'll get some paper towels. He rushed over to the counter and began sopping up the liquid, avoiding the broken parts of the cup. Aizawa reached over to grab his forearm, his movements telegraphed. Kid, it's fine. He pulled erasure to the surface and let Aizawa touch him, putting the quirk back where it belonged. A part of him ached as he let it go, but he firmly pushed that part of him to the back of his mind. He'd only taken it to save Aizawa's life, he reminded himself. It would be selfish and wrong to keep it. Mine, minimin. Izuku stopped laying down the paper towels and allowed himself to be led to sit on the side of the bed. A cleaner was called in, and he felt mildly guilty about making more work for the poor man, but his disappointment at giving Aizawa's quirk back was greater than any negative emotions he could harbor. I don't know if anyone's told you, but everyone present at the USJ attack is getting mandatory therapy. It took all of his self-control to not flinch. Izuku didn't have anything against therapy, really he didn't. It was a wonderful thing that helped people cope with any mental health issues they faced. It was just that any therapist worth their degree would realize he had a hell of a lot more trauma than just from the USJ attack. Like a lot more. Aizawa watched him with unreadable eyes. You put yourself at risk during the USJ. Existing was a risk at the USJ. Tumbled out of his mouth before he could stop it. If Izuku didn't know better, he could have sworn Aizawa's lips twitched. He tensed as an unfamiliar light approached the door and opened it. A stern woman in scrubs entered. "What are you doing up?" she demanded. Izuku froze. We started a sweep of the hospital looking for you. Considering your episode, you would think you'd realize what leaving without telling anyone would entail." Part of him wanted to snarl that his episode was the consequence of being hunted his entire life, but his common sense prevailed. "Sorry." She let out an annoyed humph. "Don't do it again. You'll be cleared tomorrow, so just be patient." He pushed himself to his feet, sparing a glance at Aizawa. "Bye, Aizawa-sensei." The man's dark red light shifts languidly as his dark eyes pin him in place. "Take care of yourself." It almost sounds like a threat. Regardless, Izuku nods and allows the nurse to escort him back to his room. He ignored the feeling of emptiness where erasure once rested. It said a lot about his situation that Kurogyari didn't so much as twitch when Shigaraki threw a stool at the bar wall. He supposed it was fairly impressive considering that he was doing it from a seated position. They did not have a healer on hand besides the doctor, and he could only do so much, but considering that he was throwing a hissy fit, he felt justified in his exasperation. "That cheater!" Shigaraki growled. All Might wasn't supposed to win. The Nomu was his equal. All for One's voice is soothing. All in good time. Besides, you learned something, didn't you? As always, Kurogyari is amazed at the villain's ability to calm Shigaraki's rampages. "Yes." Shigaraki muttered. Yes. I did." A lesser man would have shied away from his unhinged grin. "I found someone interesting." "What are you going to do about them?" All for One asked, voice inquiring and smooth. The glee in Shigaraki's eyes is a terrible, terrible thing. As happy as Shoto was to leave the hospital, he'd been aiming for his bed, not a teacher meeting. It had been stressful enough when the nurses had explained to him that his quirk may never come back and having to accept that. Only to accidentally activate it out of instinct when Namuri and Hisashi had gotten too rowdy during a visit. The doctors had been stumped, and the whole thing have Shota a headache. Regardless, here he was, sitting on an uncomfortable chair and wishing his coffee had whiskey in it. Netsu folded his paws. "I'm sure I don't need to tell you that USJ was a disaster." The resulting silence was somewhere in between somber contemplation and "no sheet, ya think?" "So, what are we going to do about it?" Samenta straightened. "Have we discovered how they breached our security?" Namuri's lip curled into a sneer. "A technology-blocking quirk. One of the captured villains fessed up to being the one to do it. It's not like they could have hacked our system." The staff shared a shudder at the possibility. Netsu had designed that bit of UA security personally, and if the villains had someone that could have broken through that, well, the USJ would have gone much differently. "I find it interesting that so many would follow a glorified man-child to fight against the #1 hero." Hisashi leaned back in his chair. From what we've seen, Shigaraki had little to no planning skills and promptly lost it when things didn't go as planned. There's no way he's the mastermind behind this. All Might smiled wryly. "Not to mention giving away the Nomu's weaknesses so easily. I might not have been able to defeat it if I had not known about its shock absorption." Vlad cleared his throat. "I know we've already said that they knew where to go because of the class schedules, and I agree that the press break-in was a diversion, But are we sure that it wasn't an inside job? The air became thick with tension. Betraying heroes is a dangerous position to be in. Hisashi narrowed his eyes. Who would have had the opportunity? Cementos folded his hands. Weren't there students in the teacher's lounge? Aizawa, you went and checked on the right? He blinked slowly before answering. Yes. Midoriya Izuku and Shinso Hitoshi were in there. Isn't Midoriya the one who lied multiple times during his interview? Vlad asked, brow furrowed. Namuri nodded with pursed lips. If he was in the teacher's lounge, he would have had the chance to see the class schedules. Cementos pointed out. And since he's a student, he would not have had to sneak in. The idea that Midoriya had been in there made Shota snort. I doubt he was the thief. Snipe raised an eyebrow. How come? He would have had the opportunity. Besides, having another kid in there just means they could be working together. I doubt he was the thief because when I found them in the staff room, Midoriya was in the middle of a severe panic attack and the only reason he wasn't hyperventilating was because Shinso had placed him under his quirk to stop him from fainting. He deadpanned. There was an uncomfortable silence. Shota continued. And in case any of you are thinking that he could be faking it, he was also likely dissociating, because he referred to myself as dark red and Shinso as purple. Is it possible Shinso is manipulating Midoriya? Vlad asked. His quirk is brainwashing, so it is possible that dash. Wow, Vlad, that's some nice quirk bias you're showing there. Hisashi interrupted, his grin sharp. Regardless, I find that unlikely. Shinso visited Midoriya in the hospital and when the nurses didn't let him in, he camped outside his room. He practically cried when I managed to convince the staff to let him see him. Namuri sneered at Vlad. I didn't realize where we decided who was guilty based solely on their quirks. Must have missed that memo. She knew, probably more than Shota, the damage quirk stereotypes could do to a person. He'd had to deal with people saying he was close to useless and might become a low-level villain. She'd had to deal with accusations of already being one. Detective Tsukachi was able to discern that while Midoriya did lie, he was not a part of or helping the League of Villains. Netsu smoothly cut in. We will look into this, but it is highly unlikely that Midoriya is affiliated with them. So we potentially have two organized villain groups. Ectoplasm pursed his lips. That makes me feel much better. All Might cleared his throat. Are we sure they will attack again? They attacked and children were put in harm's way. Snipe crossed his arms. Once is enough. Shota's arm throbbed painfully. Once was more than enough. At least the press hasn't been able to find the list of injuries the villains had. Namuri sighed. I don't know what kind of finger-pointing would go down if they got a hold of that. That was putting it lightly. Those kids should not be blamed for what they did in defense of their lives. They didn't ask to be attacked within the first month of school with only the bare minimum of training, and it wouldn't be right to judge them from those actions. Shota knew that they would not have let any of the kids take the blame if one of the villains had died. They were supposed to face danger in controlled situations with supervision, but this was throwing them into a boiling river and telling them to swim. Those vultures will be picking at the edges for a while after this. Hisashi said grimly. Netsu clapped his hands together. Indeed. Which is why we're going to proceed with the sports festival. Are you sure that's the best idea? All Might questioned. Shota found himself in the uncomfortable position of agreeing with him. It'll put even more stress on the kids. He pointed out. Even if they're going to be seeing Hound Dog for the foreseeable future, that isn't a cure-all. Netsu took a sip of his tea. We can't afford to show weakness. The police and hero presence would be heightened as to ensure student and crowd safety. Those kids just went through something traumatic. Namuri argued. They were supposed to be safe at the USJ too, but we saw how that played out. Netsu sighed. Unfortunately, we don't have a choice dash. There is always a choice. Hisashi cut in. He continued as if he hadn't been interrupted. And so the sports festival will be going as scheduled. This is not up for debate. This. Namuri hissed, shoving herself to her feet. No one said anything as she stalked out of the room and slammed the door. This indeed. Izuku had a problem. Well, Actually, he had multiple problems, but this one was a little more urgent than the others. He had forgotten, between stressing about Aizawa figuring about that he was the reason for his disappearing and then reappearing quirk and reassuring Shinso that he was fine, about the fact that they had probably tried to call him mom and inform her about what happened. And unless UA had a medium lying around somewhere, he found it highly unlikely that they were able to contact her. The hospital wouldn't let him leave unless his mother or another family member took him, which left him in his current dilemma. He was currently living in an abandoned warehouse with another teenager with no adult supervision and practically no way to fake a parent coming to pick him up. It wasn't like Shinso could dress up in a trench coat and mustache and convincingly play his father, and that left him with very few options that wouldn't make the adults around him even more suspicious. Unless, a traitorous bit of his mind whispered. Izuku didn't want to do it. He really did not want to do this, but he didn't have many options at this point. With great reluctance, he picked up his heavily cracked phone and scrolled through his contacts. Clicking the one labeled Uncle, he held the device up to his ear and waited. Jiren leaned back in his chair, a cigarette dangling from his lips. It had been a fairly slow day today, though he wasn't surprised. After a showing like that at the USJ, the smarter villains were laying low and seeing how this would play out, while the idiots were emboldened by it and thus attempted their own plans. They always failed, and Jiren didn't deal with idiots. At least he tried not to. All for One's organization had retreated to lick its wounds, and while the talentless grunts they had brought along were sitting pretty in jail right about now, the big players were still at large. He was filing Note A with a tip from his spies and the police when his phone started buzzing, the screen lighting up with the contact name Sprout. His eyebrows shot up. The brat didn't contact him unless necessary, and as far as he knew, he was still in the hospital after Shigaraki had disintegrated part of his leg. What could he possibly want? Jiren speaking. There was a slight pause on the other end. I need you to do something for me. He'd figured. The kid wasn't one for social calls. They won't let me leave the hospital without an adult to pick me up. So that was the problem. Inko couldn't for obvious reasons. Are you going to come? Jiren didn't have to. He knew very well that if he said no, the brat would manage a way out on his own. It wasn't like he had anything else to do. Yeah, I'll be there. He grunted, getting to his feet. Expect me in about 20 minutes. He didn't bother asking what hospital Izuku was at, and the kid didn't tell him. They both knew it would be a farce anyway. The nurses didn't want to let him go. It was obvious from the way they kept shooting wary glances at Jiren that they were not at all comfortable letting a teenager go with someone who looked as much like a sleazeball as Jiren did. Are you sure you wouldn't rather wait for your mom? One of the secretaries asked. Izuku smiled tiredly. Yeah, I just want to go home. My uncle is planning on dropping me off right away, so you don't have to worry about me exerting myself. The man pursed his lips but nodded. All right. I hope we won't be seeing you again anytime soon. He laughed. You and me both. Walking out of the building side by side with Jiren made his skin crawl, but he kept his face blank. Izuku doubted it actually helped. Jiren was as shrewd as he was seedy. I'm not showing you where I'm staying. Jiren glanced at him, one brow raised. He could read the subtext Izuku was putting out clear as. I'm not showing you, so don't go looking. You found a place to hole up in? Is it any good? He pulled out a lighter and cigarette. No point in denying it. Yeah. Good. Jiren patted his shoulder and Izuku had to resist the urge to backhand him. I was a bit worried, you know? Bad enough you're on your own, but that attack must have been something to deal with. And there it is. He restrained a sigh. He had known it wouldn't be long before the BSTRD started trying to fish for information. It was his job after all, and there was no way he'd come just out of the goodness of his heart. While his uncle had been vital in helping create new identities over the years, Izuku trusted him about as far as he could throw him. The two nicest things Jiren had ever done were not selling his own sister and nephew to the organization hunting them, and giving Izuku a new identification for free as some sort of gift after his mom died. He smiled, exposing his teeth. I managed just fine. It's not like anyone could have seen this coming. It's not like I have a living relative who has several contacts in the underworld and who probably knew about in at least some capacity, what was going to happen, right? The brat had bite if nothing else. Jiren didn't respond to the veiled jab, deciding it would be more trouble than it was worth to argue with the kid. He may be related, but he didn't give information out for free, even to family. Even Inko had paid for her sheet, even if it had been at a reduced price. Jiren could see her influence practically pouring off of the boy, obvious to anyone who had really known her. It was more than just the coloring though that certainly didn't hurt. It was the way he smiled sweetly with eyes that promised death. The way he looked so innocent and defenseless until you realized, far too late, that he was not. It was the cunning that lurked under the surface and cut like a knife. He had always thought that their family's intelligence must have come from their mother, since the deadbeat who'd created him had promptly f'd off, and God knows Inko's father couldn't tie his shoes without help. Even now, years after her death, Jiren could see her dangerous half-smile when someone came knocking at their door and looking for trouble. Despite being nearly a decade older than Inko and having different fathers, they'd always got along fairly well. She'd been a spitfire, and even when their careers diverged in completely different directions, they'd kept in contact. He's been fond enough of her that he'd played ignorant to her whereabouts when dangerous people came looking, even if it had made his reputation take a blow. Jiren wasn't nearly as fond of her brat, but Izuku was the only thing remaining of his kid sister, so he allowed himself to be sentimental. Izuku suddenly stopped, turning to face him. This is far enough. Jiren didn't blame the brat in the slightest for wanting to keep his location a secret. One of the things that kept him employed was information, and the more common the information, the less valuable. Flicking his cigar on the ground, he gave a half grin. You know where to find me. Don't get yourself killed. Inko would never forgive me if you died. A barely noticeable twitch made its way across Izuku's expression before the boy grinned. It was filled with teeth and pain and death and a bone-deep exhaustion born of a life of running and fighting. His laugh was grating and cold. Don't worry, it'll take far more than that to kill me. Worry about yourself. You never know when someone like yourself will find himself in the crosshairs of a war. Izuku began backing away, his expression mocking as he took a bite out of an apple he'd pulled from Lord knows where. With one last wave, he vanished into the crowd like he'd never been there at all. Jiren laughed. That kid will go far. And God help anyone who tries to stop him. Midoriya. Izuku's hands twitched as Uraraka rushed towards him, getting much too close for comfort. He was still on edge from the USJ and seeing Jiren again, not to mention Shinso had almost gotten fired from his job for not showing up when he was visiting him. He was grateful his friend had cared enough to take the risk, but they needed all the income they could get. Hey, Izuku said tiredly. We didn't see you at all after you got taken away by the ambulance. We have to exchange phone numbers. As if summoned by the noise, Ida also rose from his seat. Uraraka. It is disrespectful to yell in a classroom setting. Izuku blinked. You're even louder than her. While Ida sputtered for a response, Uraraka practically shoved her phone at him. Put your number in. She ordered. There was basically no point in doing so, seeing as his was a burner and Izuku would never be stupid enough to have something that could be used to track him, but, well, it would be weird if he didn't. It wasn't like he had a good non-suspicious excuse. Something told him saying sorry I can't. I've got to keep the International Criminal Organization off my back wouldn't go over well. Obediently typing his temporary number in, Izuku made his way to his seat, waving off his classmates' concerns over the brace on his leg. The doctors say I'll heal with no complications. That seemed to assuage the majority of them, and those who were undeterred soon had to sit down anyway as Aizawa entered the room. He still had his arm in a cast, but the bandages on his face had been removed, revealing a new jagged scar across his cheek. He looked tired, but that was nothing new. Quiet down. The room went silent almost instantly. In light of what happened at the USJ, everyone who was present is getting mandatory therapy from Hound Dog. Bakugu scoffed. I ain't some weakest beach who needs T-dash. Aizawa's glare cut him off, red eyes flashing. Looks like he knows his quirk is back. There is no weakness in seeing a therapist. There is no weakness in admitting you need help. You all went through something traumatic and there is no shame in being affected by that. He met each of their gazes, lingering on Izuku just a millisecond longer. You'll get an email telling you your appointment times. If you miss an appointment without a legitimate reason or warning, then you will get a warning. Do it up to 3 times and you may be removed from the hero course. Whispers erupted after the statement, only to disappear as Aizawa narrowed his eyes. Not to mention, you're not even out of the woods yet. Oh, for F's sake. The sports festival is coming up, and you all need to be ready. Ignoring the excited murmurs, Izuku slumped further into his seat. That whole event was going to be such a pain. He already knew he couldn't get out of participating, and preforming low enough so that he got knocked out immediately would be suspicious to those who already had an inkling of his abilities. The best he could do was just try not to draw too much attention to himself. The last thing he needed was someone recognizing him and being able to track him down. UA's sports festival was public for some stupid reason, so there would be no hiding. Is that safe though? What if the villains attack again? Yaoyorozu questioned. Aizawa let out a sigh. The security is being upgraded. If they do attack, they'll be faced with much more firepower than they were at USJ. You'll be safe. Izuku's never been safe a day in his life. He essentially tuned out the rest of class. It wasn't like he didn't know most of these subjects anyway, and only really started paying attention when Uraraka stared, yelling again. Why is everyone always so loud? Let's do our best at the sports festival. Uraraka pumped her fist in the air, a determined gleam in her eye. Ida waved his arm aggressively. Thus, it is important that we represent UA properly. All you losers are gonna eat my dust. Bakugo snarled, slamming the door open with much more force than necessary. Ha! What the F are you extras doing? Standing in front of the doorway was a crowd of other students, another blonde boy standing at the forefront. Izuku couldn't see Shinsu's trademark purple hair and considered just making a break for it. He could probably make it out the window. I guess Class 1A is filled with arrogant a-holes. The leader drawled. Guess you don't deserve the hype. Uraraka frowned. What's going on? The more explosive blonde sneered. Isn't it obvious? The useless BSTRDS have come to scope out the competition. Not that it'll help. It didn't surprise Izuku that the crowd parted to let Bakugo leave, Kirishima, Mina, Siro, and Kaminari on his tail. Keep that attitude up while you still can. The other blonde announced. Class 1B will beat you all at the sports festival, so watch your backs. No, the window probably wouldn't work. Izuku slowly shuffled himself to the front of the door. Are you done? And nothing will stand in our what? Izuku blinked slowly at him. I need a nap. I want food. Are you done doing dash? He made a vague half-hearted gesture. Whatever this is? That had apparently been the wrong thing to say, because the boy seemingly swelled with rage. I guess I should have expected such rudeness from Class 1A. Don't think that just because you fought actual villains that you're better than us. Izuku stilled. Excuse me? His voice was little more than a whisper. Ignorant of the danger around him, the blonde continued. I bet you wanted the villains to attack. That way you could get free publicity and free exposure. Honestly, how arrogant can you be? A frigid ice spread its way from Izuku's center through the rest of his limbs. Momo Yaoyorozu was smart. She had to use her quirk with any semblance of usefulness. She had textbooks upon textbooks memorized, could tell you the molecular makeup of just about anything, and had gotten in UA from recommendations. Momo was smart, and that was why, when she saw Midoriya go very still after a boy from Class 1B had started ranting, she grabbed Jiro and tried to drag her out of the danger zone. The first time she'd seen him fight, something about the way he moved had bothered her. At first, she dismissed it, but the thought wouldn't leave her alone, so she picked apart his battle trial over and over until she could recite the whole thing backwards and she realized now what she hadn't been able to place. While Midoriya was far from the only strong fighter in Class, Bakugo's massacre of a fight and Todoroki's overwhelming victory had made that clear. The latter two boys had been fighting to win, aiming to subdue their opponents. It became clear to her now that Midoriya's blows had been aiming to kill. If Minetta's head had been just the slightest bit higher, Midoriya would have crushed his windpipe, and he very well could have suffocated before anyone would have been able to save him. And as Midoriya stared at the blonde, Momo felt dread creep through her, the same dread she had felt during the battle trials, only amplified. The fact that he hadn't moved somehow only made it worse. Arrogant? Midoriya asked, expression deceivingly light. I'm afraid I don't follow. Before the blonde could do more than open his mouth, Midoriya continued. We were in a life-threatening situation with very little training, facing adults who had no qualms killing us. We didn't ask for that to happen. We didn't open the doors and invite them inside. Seemingly taken aback, the blonde's eyes widened before narrowing sharply and spitting out, "Oh please, there were pro-heroes on the scene. Freaking All Might was there. How dangerous could it have possibly been?" Midoriya rocked back on his heels, his posture slouched and non-threatening, but you would have to be blind not to see the predator lurking in his gaze. 11. The leader blinked. What? It took 11 minutes for both Eraserhead and 13 to be incapacitated. Another 15 before All Might arrived. Do you know what can happen in 15 minutes? The hall and class were dead silent. You can bleed out in less than 15 minutes. You can break over half the bones in your body. You can die. In a fight, 15 minutes is an eternity. You can see your classmates slaughtered around you. We had been separated, we had no idea if anyone else was alive. Midoriya stalked forward, leaning right into the blonde's personal space. I had been sent to the shipwreck zone, full of aquatic villains and water deeper than anyone with a non-related quirk would be able to swim. A chilling smile made its way onto Midoriya's face. By the time the pro-heroes arrived, I had more blood on my costume than water, and you know what? He whispered something into the other boy's ear, causing the latter to go paper white. Midoriya patted the blonde's shoulder. We should probably head to lunch now. We wouldn't want to not have enough time to eat. Yes, Momo is smart, and that's why she's going to be staying as far away as possible from Izuku Midoriya. Hitoshi was used to people being afraid of him. It had been a staple in his life ever since he'd gotten his quirk. Even his parents had carried that fear inside of them for all it stopped them from hitting him, and there had been times, more than he wanted to admit, that he had thought about proving them right. Thought about ordering his parents to walk into traffic or telling his bullies to destroy their own possessions. He'd always been able to talk himself off of that ledge, to rein himself in before he crossed a line he knew he'd regret. As Midoriya sat in the bathroom, knees curled to his chest and hands fisted in his hair, he knew that for the first time, he'd have to do that for someone else. Use your quirk on me. Hitoshi blinked. What? Midoriya's wild eyes met his. Use. Quirk. If I have full control right now, I am going to hurt someone. Are you sure? Midoriya snarled and the bathroom began to shake. Yes. That was all Hitoshi needed. Grasping the mental string that appeared, he activated his quirk. The shaking stopped. Hitoshi had only caught the latter part of the confrontation, but had gathered enough to know that the blonde boy was way out of line, practically blaming Class 1A for getting attacked. As someone who had seen one of the victims in a hospital, who had witnessed Midoriya wake up screaming the night he'd been discharged, it made his blood boil. He could only imagine what Midoriya must be feeling. Hitoshi had never had a friend before Midoriya, had never had to comfort anyone beyond himself, so he wasn't quite sure what to do, what to say. I think, if I hadn't ran away I would be a villain at this point. That was not what he'd been planning to say, but it was too late to back out now. There was this strange unspoken rule between the two of them. Midoriya never questioned why Hitoshi had run away, though he probably suspected, and Hitoshi never asked why Midoriya had more forged documents than a corrupt politician and no place to stay. Hitoshi hadn't dug around. When Midoriya had explained that his uncle had scooted him out of the hospital, hadn't asked why he wasn't living with him. They didn't owe anyone an explanation, even each other, and they were fine with that. They were still friends. Now, seeing Midoriya on the edge of something and not fully understand why, Hitoshi knew he needed to speak up. My mom has a quirk that lets her read people's thoughts for 3 seconds after they respond to her, and my dad can implant suggestions in animals. No one was expecting my quirk to be so strong. Midoriya couldn't answer like this, but Hitoshi knew he could hear him. I couldn't control it well as a kid, so my dad told me that if I couldn't control it I wasn't allowed to talk at all. My mom would read my mind and use my angry thoughts as an excuse to lock me in my room. They said that they were preventing a future villain. An old familiar rage crept through him. School was another hell entirely, but at least most of the kids there were too scared to fight me physically. As time went by, every little thing I did was used as an excuse as punishment. There was a reason Hitoshi had insomnia, and it wasn't a medical condition. More often than not, if he fell asleep in his room, one of his parents would come barreling in to destroy something of his. Weekends had been the worst, because their drinking was that much heavier. 2 days after I graduated middle school, my mother started wailing on me worse than usual, so I used my quirk to make her stop. My dad saw what happened and said that if he ever saw me again, he would call the police on me. I didn't try coming back after that. The first few weeks had been horrible, and Hitoshi knew the only reason he hadn't died was because of his quirk. It had been vital in convincing some people to leave him alone. I found the warehouse and just figured things out from there. Hitoshi's voice was rough, but he refused to cry about people who had never loved him, never thought of him as more than a potential threat. I can't tell you how many times I wanted to hurt them, wanted to give them a real reason to be afraid. If I had stayed, I think I would have. A hurt, to admit out loud, having spent so long refusing that he would ever become a villain. If he had told someone else, well, then he was just proving them right, wasn't he? That he was a potential villain, that he did need to be watched. More than anything else, he wanted to be a hero, but there had been days, and there still were days, that Hitoshi considered just stopping. Stop pushing the boulder uphill, stop refuting every comment, stop reining himself in. He wasn't sure he wanted to know what he'd become if he did. A sudden strain appeared on his connection to Midoriya. It was very slight, and similar to the one he'd felt when Hitoshi had first used his quirk on him. "Do you want me to release you?" he asked. The strain doubled, making him wince. Releasing the connection was easy, and Midoriya's eyes lost their blank look. Hitoshi slowly slid down the wall, sitting close enough that he could feel the other's body heat. "You don't have to tell me anything," he said into the silence. I didn't say all that to make you feel obliged to tell me anything." After what seemed like an eternity, Midoriya looked up. "I can't tell you. Not right now. You don't have to tell me anything. Ever," Hitoshi said, shifting so that he could wrap an arm around the smaller teen. Midoriya's smile was heartbreakingly sad. "I will. One day." And that promise was more than enough. Nito Monoma had been confronted before. He'd had people yell, berate, and scold him for numerous things. People much bigger and much more physically intimidating than a freckled boy who looked like a strong wind could knock him over. Yet no one had ever made him feel quite so threatened. Nito wasn't one to back down from a challenge, especially one thrown by those dogs from 1A. But this boy would need to be watched more before he made his move. By the time the pro heroes arrived, I had more blood on my costume than water, and you know what? The boy's voice dropped to a whisper. It wasn't mine. No, Nito wasn't going to approach Midoriya anytime soon. Toshinori's mind was made up. The thought had first sparked during the entrance exam and had then been solidified by the battle trials and UA. He knew that Izuku Midoriya was destined to be the next holder of One for All. The only thing he really needed to do now was talk to him. Toshinori was aware that others would be skeptical of his choice, seeing as he had lied a few times during his interview, but he knew that young Midoriya was the right choice. He had a true heroic spirit. Toshinori had already sent a letter to Gran Torino, letting him know about his decision and ask for his old mentor to send an internship request. After getting told by the majority of the other teachers that his methods were unhelpful at best to first-year hero students, he figured that Gran would do a better job than him at guiding young Midoriya's usage of One for All. He also ended up informing Nedzu, but that was because the principal always seemed to know everything, and it would be rather pointless to hide it. He had asked if he was sure about his choice despite the suspicions surrounding the boy. Of course he was. He wouldn't make such a decision frivolously. In the end, Nedzu simply asked to be there when Toshinori explained everything to young Midoriya. Nedzu asked for Midoriya to come to his office over the PA, and the hero had full intentions of intercepting him and talking to the boy. After all, a good bond was needed between mentor and mentee. He was in his small form, but it was for the best this way. He needed his time for teaching after all. Midoriya came walking down the hallway, head buried in what looked like a notebook as he sped towards the principal's office. Toshinori moved to intercept him, but Midoriya didn't even stop, just ran straight into him. F-. Midoriya cursed, startling the blonde. That was nothing, however, to what he said next. Sorry, All Might, I wasn't looking where I was going. Izuku knew, the second those words left his mouth, that he had made a mistake. He had no idea why the principal had summoned him, though he was desperately hoping it wasn't because of his papers. Jiren was one of the best when it came to fake identities, but Nezu was probably the smartest person in Japan, if not the world, so it stood to reason that he might have noticed something. Izuku had been writing down possibilities of what could have gone wrong in his own code, of course, when he'd bumped into the man standing before him. He hadn't been looking and had only been using his original quirk to sense people. Right now, the candle. That was All Might's light flickered in agitation and shock. It made sense in an odd way that this was the reason why the man's light had changed so drastically at the USJ. This must be what he looked like when he wasn't using his quirk. What did you just say? And this was not his teacher asking, no, this was the #1 hero of Japan demanding he answer. Forcing himself to relax, Izuku blinked in faux confusion. Oh, you're not All Might. Sorry, I don't really know why I said that. Despite the gaunt look of him, the hero still towered over him. You're coming with me, he said, grabbing his upper bicep. Alarm coursed through him. I have to go to the principal's office. Let go, let go, let go, let go. I'm aware. For a split second, Izuku considered jerking his arm away and making a break for it. He might have too, if it weren't for that fact that it was effing All Might. Look, I don't know why you're reacting this way. It's not like you're All Might. The grip tightened as Izuku's heart pounded rapidly. Fuck. Nezu was pouring 3 cups of tea when the Midoriya was unceremoniously shoved into the room. The boy stumbled before righting himself, posture speaking of a cornered animal ready to lash out. His eyes flickered between Yagi's small form and his own place at the head of the table, hands twitching. The instant Yagi looked away from Midoriya, the teen suddenly smoothed over entirely. His rigid posture relaxed, pursed lips softening and expressions switching from tense to curious. Well, that is certainly interesting. While it was mildly concerning that Midoriya could change his entire body language on a dime, Nezu had seen stranger. Come take a seat, he said with a smile. Here, I'll pour you some tea. Yagi's normally smiling face was twisted into frown. He knows. Well, that complicated things. Izuku Midoriya was already a problem that he couldn't wait to solve, and this just made things even more interesting. Seeing as Yagi was extremely protective over his secret, he had probably overreacted, hence his previous tension. Does he now? Well, I see no reason we can't sort this out. Why don't you take a seat, Midoriya? Looking like he would rather jump into a pit of lava, Midoriya slowly crept into a chair, his body angled so that his back wasn't turned on either of them. Sliding a cup to both males seated opposite from him, Nezu discreetly had sent out a message to Tsukachi telling him to come to UA as soon as Yagi had confirmed that he would be telling Midoriya today. While the detective's presence may unsettle Midoriya even more and cause him to shut down, having him there would calm Yagi and reduce the possibility of any deception. How was your day today? He asked, taking a sip of his own tea. Not too stressful, I hope. UA's curriculum is hardly a walk in the park. Midoriya eyed him. It was fine, he said eventually. I like learning. Liked learning indeed. His written exam had spoken more of someone who had an intelligence quirk rather than telekinesis, and it was easy to see that he was passing his classes with flying colors. It seems we share a trait, he said pleasantly. What's your favorite subject? Yagi's frown deepened. Nezu. Personally, mine is science. It's such a broad subject with endless possibilities, don't you think? Midoriya smiled politely. Science is cool, he said quietly. I like languages the best though. It did not escape Nezu that he said languages. Seeing the different ways humans communicate is fascinating. He agreed. For no apparent reason, Midoriya froze before relaxing once again. A knock sounded from the door. "Come in," Nezu called out, not at all surprised when it was Tsukachi who stepped in. Curiously enough, Midoriya didn't look the slightest bit shocked. Not pleased, but as though he had been expecting it. "Naomasa? What are you doing here?" Yagi questioned. Tsukachi paused minutely. "Nezu asked for me to be here for when you asked Midoriya to be your successor." A strange expression flickered over Midoriya's face before it disappeared. "We've come across a bit of a problem. You see, Midoriya here seemed to know about Yagi's small form before being told. Why don't you explain what happened?" He encouraged. It was a short story but raised many questions. From his own watching of the cameras before they entered, the teen hadn't even looked up when he first spoke. That meant he somehow knew it was All Might without even seeing him. This promises to be fascinating. Naomasa was too tired for this sheet. Being summoned by Nezu always led to a headache, but he hadn't expected this one to be the same headache he'd been dealing with before. Sitting there, sipping tea was Izuku Midoriya, features pleasant and lightly curious. His posture didn't indicate being a threat in the slightest, and when their eyes met, the boy smiled slightly. It reminded him chillingly of a snake, acting harmless until the moment of attack. "So, how did you know about All Might's small form?" Nezu questioned, drawing the unsettling gaze of the teen away from him. The air becomes heavy. "I didn't." Naomasa doesn't know if he's relieved by that or not. Nezu takes his silence as confirmation and continues. "Oh, then how did you identify All Might?" The pause. "I've seen All Might in that suit before. I was distracted while walking here, and since I've never seen anyone else with that color suit, it makes sense for my preoccupied mind to jump to the last person I saw in it." His quirk's response did little to reassure him. The wording was too specific, admitting very little and leaving much up in the air. Nezu seemed to be thinking along the same lines. "And is that how you identified him?" "Yes. But..." He gave a slight shake to his head, and Nezu's grin grew. "We can't sort this out unless you're honest with us. This is a national secret, you understand." Midoriya's eyes narrowed as they flickered from Naomasa to Nezu. "I'll trade you." Toshinori blinked. "What?" "I'll explain how I knew this form was All Might, and you explain why you have that form and what the detective here meant by making you my successor." Naomasa could not believe he was bargaining. He had arguably the most powerful man in the world, the smartest creature in the world, and high figure of law enforcement, and he was bargaining for a national secret to have on top of the one he already knew. He was about to say as much when Nezu tilted his head in concession. "Very well. As long as Yagi agrees, I don't see a problem with that. What was that rat playing at?" And Toshinori, the impulsive idiot, agreed as well. "Am I the only sane one here?" Midoriya leaned back in his chair, taking a sip of his tea. "I have a strange sort of add-on ability in my quirk," he said slowly. "I can sense people's quirks within a certain radius of me and use it to identify people." "Well, that was weird and kind of unexpected. Isn't your quirk a powerful telekinesis?" Nezu questioned. "Having a sensing ability on top of that seems strange." Midoriya shrugged. "I don't know why, it's just there. All this fuss and suspicion over a strange mutation's quirk. God, he wanted to go home. And your quirk is telekinesis, correct?" Toshinori said suddenly. Midoriya gave him an odd look. "I have a telekinesis quirk." Why didn't he just say yes? The paranoid part of Naomasa questioned. "Well, now that that's out of the way, I believe we should hold our side of the deal up," Nezu said with a clap. "Yagi, if you would?" With a nod, his friend then began the tale of how he could pass on his quirk, leaving out All for One but giving enough information to give him a solid idea. There was a long silence as Midoriya seemed to digest the information. He seemed uncomfortably calm about the whole thing, and not nearly as surprised as he should have been. "That makes a lot of sense," he said eventually. "Considering you've never been seen in public doing things like grocery shopping, a transformation aspect of your quirk is actually something I've considered." Naomasa blinked. "You've thought that much about All Might's quirk?" I've thought that much about everyone's quirk. His unsettling green eyes seem to bore into him. I find them fascinating. Tashinori cleared his throat. I apologize for my behavior, but now that we've gotten that cleared up, I wanted to ask Dash. No. Tashinori coughed up blood. Excuse me? You're going to ask me to be your successor, right? Pass your quirk along to me like your mentor did to you? Midoriya stretched his arms out, getting to his feet in one swift movement. My answer is no. Netsu's grin seemed to grow, which, all in all, is never a good sign. And why is that? The mammal asked. Midoriya's tone was light as he stalked towards the door. Power comes with a cost. Even when you think you've already paid it, the universe isn't one to listen to the whims of mortals. He eyed Tashinori. Even those likened to gods.